Well, good afternoon, council members and members of the public joining us for this meeting. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Cody Ziegler, Director of Statewide Policy here at the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, and I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you all for your commitment in our efforts to prevent and end homelessness in California and for joining us for this meeting. So a few reminders before we begin. This is a 3-hour meeting, and while we'll do our best to stick to that time frame, there is a possibility we may go over that timing slightly. Prior to this meeting, council members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. We'll try to leave some time at the end for council members to ask general questions, but if we run out of time, please feel free to reach out to any CalICH staff member. So I am going to move us to the agenda. Let's see if I got it here. Okay, hold on, technical. There we go. So today we're gonna have our call to order. We'll vote on our consent calendar. We will hear from our co-chairs for their opening remarks. Our executive officer, Megan Marshall, will give her updates. And then we're gonna have 3 specific agenda items for this meeting. We're going to recognize our outgoing advisory committee members. So we'll talk more about that. We have some members here in person with us today and some members joining virtually. So thank you all to the advisory committee members who are here today. We're going to talk a little bit about Proposition 1 implementation updates. And then we're going to move on to accountability and strategic investments. And we'll close the meeting with general public comments and adjournment. So with that, I would like to welcome, the meeting is hereby called to order on this day, June 4th, 2025 at 1:05 p.m. So now I'll pass it to CalICH Tribal Liaison Bavila Blossoming Bear to read the tribal land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Cody. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the unceded homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisenan people, the Patwin Wintu people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we are joining from in this space, we are all on California Native American land. Thank you.
Thank you, Bavila. Now I'll ask CalICH staff member Claire Bannerman to please call roll.
Thank you. Oh, perfect. Okay, this is the attendance roll call for the council. We need a majority of members or a quorum to hold this meeting today. Council members, after I call your name, please say present or here. Apologies if I mispronounce any names. Designees, please state your name using a microphone for the record when your council member name is called. Tamika Moss. Kim Johnson. Michelle Boss. Stephanie Clendenin. Susan Damaris. Rebecca Franklin. Michael Keever. Margot Cashel. Veronica Lewis. Jeff McCumber. William McGee. Erica Pan. Kaina Pereira. Kim Rutledge. Lindsay Sin. Christina Schneider-Ashtari. All right, thank you, Rowena Tomanang.
Here for Rowena Tomanang.
Jennifer Troya. Gustavo Velasquez. Nancy Ward. And Marina Wyant. Thank you. We have a quorum, and I will move us on to the next agenda item. So Agenda item 2 is the consent calendar. The consent calendar is for regular or non-controversial items that need to be approved by the council via a vote. While we do not expect any discussions from members, the council may engage in a discussion on any items in the consent calendar if they so choose. We have one item, the adoption of the March 12th meeting summary. Are there any comments from council members? Okay, great. Since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open it up for public comment. Please keep your comments to the items on the consent calendar only. If your public comment is not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for public comment at the end of this meeting. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon. For those joining us by telephone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment, and you will be instructed to unmute yourself. You will have 2 minutes to make your comment. Are there any public comments for the March 12th council meeting summary? Okay, I see no hands raised. Do we have anyone who would like to motion to adopt? Thank you, Tamika. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion to adopt. We will be voting through raised hands. The categories will be as follows: yes, no, or abstain. Those voting yes, please raise your hands. Okay, great. Those voting no, and those abstaining. Great. Thank you very much. And I will now pass it back to Cody to facilitate our next agenda item. Sorry.
Great, thank you all. I'm actually going to pass it to our co-chairs to give their opening remarks. So we can start with Secretary Moss.
Thank you, Cody. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Good afternoon, members of the public. I just had a couple of announcements I wanted to share before we get started. The first is in April, the governor submitted a reorganization plan of the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency to the Little Hoover Commission. This reorganization would divide my agency into two cabinet level agencies, one for consumer protection, so the California Business Consumer Services Agency, and one designated specifically for housing and homelessness, the California Housing and Homelessness Agency. We are incredibly excited that the Little Hoover Commission has submitted an approval of the governor's reorganization to the legislature. The legislature will now take some time to opine on that process. But what is most exciting is BCSH was stood up in 2012 under Governor Jerry Brown. And although I have really enjoyed this mosaic of both all of my consumer protections and business regulation departments, as well as our homelessness and housing departments, I do think, given the extraordinary growth and focus that both halves of our portfolio do in service of California, it is really a time where we have outgrown our existing structure, and it will allow us to put much more emphasis and specialization in both agencies as they move forward. And as it relates to Cal ICH, as a part of the reorganization will become an independent business entity under the reorganization. So really functioning as its own department and being able to really solidify the incredible work that this council does, in addition to all the great work that the staff does. So it is quite extraordinary. I'm super excited about it. We have many steps to go, but this is a really exciting opportunity to really institutionalize our commitment to what I think is California's issue of our time. So really excited about that. Wanted to just quickly update folks on the LA fire recovery. Secretary Johnson and I and many of our colleagues, Secretary Sen and others, Director Velasquez continue to provide support to the Los Angeles community, both the city and the county. We are now sort of moving toward a crisis response into long-term recovery. So we will be working with the city and county to think about what are all of the ways in which the state can support its efforts to rebuild sustainably, quickly, and really putting community first. So those efforts will continue. We've been incredibly grateful to the governor's leadership around all of the executive orders that have been issued during this time to support the Los Angeles community. So that work will continue. But just to let you all know, many of us are still in regular partnership with our neighbors to the south. So thank you all for your work there. One thing I wanted to just acknowledge, Rebecca, Cal HFA is going to be, the governor really wanted us to think about a mortgage relief program to support homeowners who needed assistance in covering their mortgage, and Cal HFA stepped up under Rebecca's leadership, and we're going to be talking about that this week, this program that will be available to homeowners in Los Angeles to support their recovery and mortgage support. So thank you, Rebecca, for your leadership on that. And then lastly, two things lastly. The first of the last is just the federal activities. Many of us are monitoring them on a daily basis. I'm really going to give space for Secretary Johnson to talk much more specifically about how many of our state programs are affected. We are certainly looking at it from our housing and homelessness side. Gustavo, under his leadership, is really working with our federal partners as much as one can to make sure that we receive our disaster recovery funds, not just for this disaster, as we've submitted a federal supplemental to the Congress, $40 billion that the governor and many of us and community members have been advocating for. But, it's a tenuous time. So just wanted to call that out and let folks know that we are, still putting Californians at the center of our work there, but also continuing to be open to work with the federal government on responding to our most urgent crisis right now. And then lastly, I just wanted to say thank you to the advisory board members who are transitioning off of the advisory committee, those who will be welcomed on. I know how important it is to have the voices of our community a part of this process in how we administer the work of this council. And I'm just in deep gratitude for your service. I know it has not been easy all the time, but it has certainly been a partnership that we appreciate. And I really look forward to our chance to deepen the work. We have a much more clearer focus on what we're going to be trying to do with the action plan. And we're really going to be leaning on many of our advisory committee members as we do our leave and others to help advance the work. So thank you all so much for your service. Secretary Johnson.
Thank you, Secretary Moss. And I'll also pile on appreciation for the advisory committee's work. Thank you all who have participated in that way and continue to engage with us as thought partners and leaders in the work that we have ahead of us in implementing the plan. So appreciate that very much. Wanted to share a couple of things on the conversation of federal budget and on the conversation of engagement and advisement. We have advice and we have guidance on what works in our wonderful state that we all work on each and every day. And so I just appreciation for those of you who are lifting up our successes and what is working, especially as it relates to integration, how we think about housing, health, social services, and what the integration makes as a difference in terms of the outcomes that we are all collectively trying to achieve for Californians. So appreciate that. We are certainly challenged by some of the proposals that were included in the reconciliation that Congress approved. Just to give you a sense, just in the Medi-Cal space, in the healthcare space, the impact would be about a $30 billion loss. We're talking B's, 30 billion, and over 3.4 million Californians impacted by that, and just in the healthcare space alone. So obviously significant, a lot of work is being done on that analysis to really understand, and of course, Now it's with the Senate, who is aiming to have their proposal related to reconciliation by July 4th. So we will continue to engage in that process and make sure we both understand the impact of what's coming out in proposals, but also, again, lifting up the great work that each of you does every day across the state. That obviously other federal activity has also had impact on our own budget in California. And so you are likely tracking the May revision that now the legislature is engaging on in terms of landing a final budget for the state. But we are facing, due to volatility and some of the tariff policy changes, a $12 billion deficit in California in the coming year. And so we do have some significant proposals that would have an impact on who we serve, and we're mindful and thoughtful about those. And also, though, in terms of maintaining our progress wherever we can. I do want to highlight for this group a very significant bright spot, and Director Boss can speak more to it, but there is a proposal in the May revision for a flexible housing subsidy pool, $200 million, if you're not tracking, through the Proposition 35 funds over 2 years for flexible housing pool rental assistance and housing supports, with a focus on those with the most significant behavioral health needs. So I want to make sure you are tracking that proposal, and that is a phenomenal investment and also another bridge to connecting some of the pieces that we have been working on collectively to address the housing needs of those who are unsheltered. Lots of technical assistance and training is coming along with that, so we will stay tuned for how that lands. But again, grateful for that bright spot. Also, just teeing up the Prop 1 piece. Again, just want to make sure everyone's still tracking at the California Health and Human Services Agency the arc of our behavioral health transformation work, which also is related to the Prop 1 piece that there's going to be a panel on for our conversation this afternoon. But also another piece of that is CARE, Community Assistance Recovery and Empowerment Act, and that's really focused on those individuals who are unsheltered and have schizophrenia. And I have had the great privilege over the last couple of months to be out in community, my favorite place to be, Alameda County, Sacramento County, and we'll be doing some additional visits now that the CARE is statewide, really seeing the court proceedings, seeing individuals being there in the courtroom and watching the phenomenal supports of even getting an individual through the door. Maybe they had their tools with them, and so that was a security issue. And how do we wrap around and change our systems to meet the needs of those who we have the privilege to serve? So it's been just phenomenal to see that. But it's also, I will just have to share with you all, great to see in real time the addressing of being unsheltered. So it's really a power. Of course, judges have power, but to see the judge say, wait a minute, what can we do today for this individual who is willing to connect to these supports and engage in a very different way? And how do we take advantage of that moment and opportunity? So just tremendous work happening across the state, and my gratitude to all of the partners in that effort. Also on the good news front, so that's happening, more success, we are doing it, is Prop 1. And so again, you'll hear from Director Boss in just a moment, and just again, appreciate her leadership and the leadership of her department, that we have our $4.4 billion component of an overall $6.4 billion component on the Bond Act out in really tremendous speed. This is over 124 projects accounting for 214 mental health and or substance use disorder settings throughout California, meeting the need, addressing gaps in real time. Just again, appreciation on those who applied. We absolutely had more applications than we had a resource for, but we do also have the round 2 that's coming right out, and you'll hear some of the other work of the Bond Act in that space. So just want to highlight that. And then of course, next year, and beginning in 2026, under the Behavioral Health Services Act, 30% of each county's funding allocation must be used for housing interventions, again, for Californians with the most significant behavioral health needs who are at risk of homelessness. So just to say again, we are identifying the gaps, we are addressing them, and really working with community partners to meet the needs of communities. So grateful for everyone's efforts on those fronts, and look forward to the panel presentation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, co-chairs. Appreciate those comments. And Secretary Johnson, we got to make sure you stay in community, because that was a whole lot of energy you brought back. So very much appreciate all of the fun highlights. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for spending some time with us here today to talk about this very important topic we have at hand, the collective responsibility of this council. I again am Megan Marshall, the Executive Officer for CalICH. I want to begin my executive officer updates by first advancing the slides. There we go. And offering a few updates from our work in this past quarter. So first, our external affairs team has been closely monitoring local and statewide media coverage of efforts to address homelessness. This includes literal media, but also includes monitoring city council agendas, board of supervisors agendas, those sorts of things, really with the intention to offer proactive technical assistance where we think it's necessary and could benefit the community. And in some cases offer public comment in city council meetings and board of supervisors meetings to ensure that folks know who we are, sort of the power behind this council, the collective efforts that we all have at the state, and making those available to our local partners. There's been some instances of misunderstandings, misinterpretations of state law where we were able to reconcile before something became local policy. And that's a new space for CalICH to step into, but something that I'm very excited for. We also recently released the HEART Disaster Preparedness Toolkit and Companion webinar. It's a resource designed to help communities better prepare for and respond to disasters affecting people experiencing homelessness. And I want to thank, in particular, a member from our Lived Experience Advisory Board, Caressa Smith, who facilitated a portion of that webinar with special attention to rural counties. She's a resident of Lake County, which is to our sort of rural north, who experienced a fire in 2024. And so having a Lived Experience Advisory Board member, but as well as somebody who represents an already underserved community was very impactful. So Caressa, if you're watching, thank you so much. And special thank you to Courtney Tacker, who's our Director of Policy and Innovation, who really led that effort when she was Director of Local Initiatives. So on the governance side of things, we are actively recruiting, as many of you know, for a newly structured advisory committee. And we're hoping that will bring a stronger alignment between subject matter expertise and area of state investments. I want to sincerely thank council members who shared recommendations of persons who had particular areas of expertise. CDCR, I was hoping Jeff would be here today, so I could say especially 11 very, very like full bios included with those 11 recommendations. So, but thank you to everyone who submitted candidates for those roles. And we will share the new members, of course, with the council after final appointments have been made by our co-chairs. All right. Before I pass it to Cody to facilitate this item, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank our outgoing advisory committee members, 2 of whom are in person with us. Many of them are on Zoom. Not only for your time and insight, but for your patience as CalICH has continued to grow into who we are today. While it may not have always felt like progress from your vantage point, I want to reassure you that your time was well spent. Your contributions have been incredibly valuable. Your feedback, your lived experience, and presence at our virtual table have directly influenced how we think about purpose, relationships, and accountability. You've helped us grow, and we are incredibly grateful for that. So thank you for being part of this chapter in our development. And with that, I will turn it over to Cody.
Great. Well, thank you, Megan. And yeah, this is a fun agenda item because we just get to be really grateful to our advisory committee members, both online, as Megan said, and here today in the room. Just want to take a minute to, look at the list of names, read them out. This was we say inaugural advisory committee members because may seem surprising, but before this, CalICH did not have an advisory committee in this way, right? So these people were the first people to join us. We were, as Megan sort of alluded to, really figuring out what it looked like to have an advisory committee. And they were very patient and thoughtful and helpful in us developing what it looks like. So we had Ludmilla Bade, Al Ballesteros, Samantha Batko, Doug Bond, Carolyn Coleman, Joe Coletti, Charlene Dimas Peinado, Vitka Eisen, Dora Gallo, Jennifer Hart Dietz, Eric Harris, Charles Helgett, Janet Kelly, Jody Ketcheside, Margot Cushell, who loved us so much she decided to become a council member, Philip Mangano, Chris Martin, Mariah McGill, Luana Murphy, Elisa Orduña, Sharon Rapport, Janie Roundtree, Emilio Salas, Miguel Santana, Doug Shoemaker, Sean Spear, Reba Stevens, Megan Van Sant, Alex Visotsky, Javon Wilkes, and Roxanne Wilson. So if you have worked in the housing and homelessness space for a while, you probably recognize some, if not many, many of those names. These folks really took their time to help us out and to really help us think about what does it mean to bring their voices to the table of, to this table, to the council, making decisions about state policy. So I will note that 3 of these members, actually the last 3 listed here, which is in alphabetical order, and I swear it's not because we have a preference for the end of the alphabet, are actually going to stay on with us for a little bit longer, help us transition the new council or the new committee members, and really, help guide and provide some of that transition experience. So really appreciative to everyone for their time and those who are continuing. Also just want to acknowledge Ludmilla Bade and Javon Wilkes, who are here with us today, who made it out to the meeting. Yes, round of applause for sure. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that the committee worked on, over the past few years. As we sort of mentioned, they helped shape the charter for the committee. What does it look like for them to be a body? What does it look like for them to provide recommendations and advice to the council? Right? They provided input on our action plan, a lot of input on the action plan, including the vision, our system level goals, and the tools that we're talking about that the state has to prevent and end homelessness. They shared recommendations on coordinating and streamlining state funding with the council, which Cal ICH staff are actively moving forward in our working groups and other areas. They provided input on Cal ICH resource development and guidance documents, including documents relating to Housing First and recovery housing, emergency response toolkit, and SB 914. And then also, as Megan said, just their general extreme patience with us and learning with us as we went. Just really appreciate all of that. And so we are very excited for the next round of advisory committee members to join us. We also know that comes on, the back of the people who are leaving us. So really appreciate them. And since we have a few of them in the room, and I talked very quickly, want to see if either of the folks in the room today feel interested in just saying a little bit about what their experience was like on the committee and what they hope for the future. They got to say this in their last advisory committee meeting, and we shared some of that with you all. But just want to see if Ludmilla or Javon, great, would like to say anything.
I'll walk over to you. Ooh, goodness.
How do I do this? So hello, this is Ludmilla. I'm first alphabetically. I guess I'll go first. So I really want to thank you all. It's been such an honor. I've learned so much as part of this. I've been able to connect and talk in person with people that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to. And I really want to going into the future. It's systems things that need to be supported and helped, and we're talking a lot about that. But there's an individual connection with homeless people that is really, really valuable. And I think those of us who sit in some of these places, we can really forget that. We need to be connected with the street. I actually did a back of the envelope calculation. About $10 a month is what it would take on average for myself as an individual to be contributing to or homeless. The math on that is about $2,000 income and resources to maintain a place to live and a reasonable at least basic standard of living. 200,000 homeless people, 40 million people in California. And if you do the math on that, that comes to an average of $2 a month worth of time, money, or connection with an actual person who is homeless. Doesn't have to be the worst off, doesn't have to be somebody you don't like, but just that opportunity to have a conversation, say hello, say how are you, offer a resource. It can be so educational as far as where the gaps in the system are, and it's so meaningful to actually meet somebody and treat them as a person, not some, not just across the table the same as I would with anybody in this room. There's a tremendous need for a space for individual feedback. The grievance systems across the state are really broken. It's not really safe to speak directly to a provider. Really having some space where people can share their successes of what they've, what benefit help they've received or what's working for them, share the issues or grievances, and share their suggestions. Okay, so I tend to be one that I have a lot of suggestions. One of the things that I'm concerned about, and all in the times that are ahead, is I know that some of you might experience exhaustion, burnout, inadequate or insecure funding, and questions about effectiveness. What I've found for myself is I remember the drama triangle. If I'm overly rescuing people, I get exhausted. If people are harming people, that takes a lot of energy. It's and to not treat people as a victim. There are times, as I said, where you need a crisis response, but then how can you help that person transition to like long-term recovery? How can you offer people a hand up instead of a handout? That's one of the most common things that I've heard from people on the street. How can you give us a hand up instead of a handout? And it takes a lot less work to do that. Well, it takes a different kind of work because you're mindfully helping the person. So switch from the drama triangle if you find yourself there or you find somebody else there. Encourage people to take on the role of a coach and to find creative ways to find their strengths, all of us. And a huge thing is reducing stigma. It would be so wonderful if we could reduce the stigma. There's long-standing stigma between and conflict between people who are travelers and people who are settlers. You see this in colonialism, you see this in other kinds of things. The antagonism to people who are travelers is so toxic. The antagonism to people who are on the move for one reason or another. In our times of climate change, in our times of economic change, I think we really need to also have this social change to meet these challenges. And those of you who are familiar with the triple bottom line, you'll see in there the social, environmental, and the economic. And I really hope that there will be space for people who are seeking community, travelers in RVs, like people who are moving to something, who can be a meaningful part of the community. One of the biggest skills that people who are homeless have, and many people don't recognize this, is we have an ability to survive. We may not be surviving perfectly, but many of us have been able to navigate things that would surprise you. And those capacities for survival, how can we integrate those into strengths and long-term recovery? I want to really, really thank you. Do remember that $10 a month thing. If you don't know what else to do, if things are getting shaky, you can always connect with somebody and hear more of their story. And I'm sure that will help both you and them. Thank you all so much for everything you're doing. Thank you very much again.
All right, John Wilkes, I don't know how you're gonna follow that, sir, but you'll do your best.
Yeah, I thought this was election, but the mic came this way. Okay, we got it now. Just a huge thank you, Secretary Moss, Secretary Johnson, being on the ground. A lot of folks I've been able and had the pleasure and the blessing to spend time with and speak to the issues, especially when it comes to youth that are experiencing homelessness. But I really got to say that it has been a blessing to come from experience to now being in a position to talk about it and see what the state is doing about it. This is a lifetime dream that I didn't think would ever come to this point. Now that we even have Cal AIM and transitional rent coming online in January, yes, there's still a lot of things that we need to do. There's still a lot of parts in which we get to come together and be the bonding that really helps people heal and just really build themselves back together. And so we do that together. And I'm excited to join and be a part of the advisory committee moving forward with Alex and Roxanne. Sometimes, you know, the last do become first at some points because, yes, last name W, but we here. And so really privileged and blessed to be a part of this group and really see where the work is going to take us in the future.
All right, Cody, coming back up to you.
I can take the picture. That's great. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you both. I did not prep them on that, so that was really off the cuff. Thank you for being willing to do that and to speak to your experience. Also, we have other folks online who we don't have time to hear from each one of them individually, unfortunately, but just want to recognize that Al, Alex, Elisa, Carolyn, Janet, Jennifer, Jody, Joe, Mariah, Philip, and Roxanne are all online with us as well. So big thanks to you all for joining us today. And yeah, just another round of applause for our advisory committee members. Okay, and Megan is signaling to me that she wants to take a picture. So and I didn't prep Javon and Ludmilla to take a picture either, so apologies for that. It is voluntary. We're doing it on the fly here. Oh. All right, Megan, try this. Try that. Oh, there you go. On the screen, we can see you now. Sorry, I should have warned you about that too. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. All right, great. Well, thank you all for that. Appreciate it. And now I believe my piece is done here. So I'm going to pass it back to Megan to continue us on with the agenda.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, everybody. Moving on to our next agenda item. In addition to member briefings in advance of the council meetings, CalICH also provides a briefing to legislative staff. In the briefing for March 2025, legislative staff requested an update on Prop 1 implementation to be included on the June agenda. So here we are. Prop 1 represents a major opportunity to invest in housing and behavioral health solutions that meet people where they are. And today we're spotlighting how that work is taking shape. We've invited 3 of our council member departments, the Department of Healthcare Services, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, CalVet, to provide updates on their unique roles in Prop 1 implementation. These presentations will include milestones, capstones, support offered, and collaboration occurring across the responsible departments. This model of interagency alignment is extraordinary, I will say, and we're incredibly grateful for each council member and the respective teams for the thoughtfulness and collaboration they've brought to this work. With that, I will introduce Councilmember Michelle Bass to begin.
Hi there, thank you. So maybe just to set the stage on Proposition 1 that was passed by the voters in March of 2024 and has really two key components. The transition of the Mental Health Services Act into the Behavioral Health Services Act. And the Mental Health Services Act was Proposition 63 many years ago. And then also the bond dollars for behavioral health infrastructure, 6.4 billion in bond dollars and 4.4 billion of those dollars coming to the Department of Healthcare Services. With regard to the bond, I'll start there. Very excited. May 12th, we announced the awards for the first round of bond dollars. So this is $3.3 billion that we awarded to actual applicants. So we are awarding to 124 projects, 214 different facilities representing projects in 54 counties across the state. So really just comprehensively looking across the state, where have we awarded prior bond BCHIP dollars? BCHIP was authorized under legislation in 2021, and up to this point it awarded $1.7 billion for behavioral health treatment and residential services and settings. And so kind of looking, where are the needs across the state? Where do we need to build out really the entire continuum of behavioral health treatment facilities and residential care? And so very excited that we were able to make those awards in May, and really just getting the dollars out there as soon as possible. The first actual groundbreaking with those bond dollars is scheduled for later this month. So the money is out there and moving very quickly, and just super excited, really recognizing the need. There have been many studies citing the need for services, facilities and residential treatment. So really getting these dollars out there to meet the needs of our community. Last week, May 30th, we announced the second round, about $800 million for the round 2 of these bond dollars. The application for those dollars is due in October, and we're hoping to announce those awards next spring. So really, the fire is lit under us to get these dollars out as quickly as possible, because we know there are needs in the community. So we're very excited about kind of the progress we've made on the bond BCHIP dollars. And then I know Gustavo will talk a little bit about the other dollars in a minute. And maybe just quickly, sorry, in terms of the second component, the Behavioral Health Services Act, as the Secretary mentioned, July 2026 is when BHSA goes into effect. And that completely reforms the way the local dollars and state dollars are used to support behavioral health services at the local level. As you may recall, these dollars now can be used for substance use disorder services only, not just mental health. Really, so trying to spread the need or use of these dollars, really prioritizing the most vulnerable, really focus on the homeless, those with severe needs, and justice involved, child welfare involved. And so really prioritizing these dollars as part of really the kind of outcomes that we're expecting with these BHSA dollars. 30% of these dollars are going towards housing interventions. And this is a complete change compared to how MHSA dollars were authorized under Prop 63. As part of that, we're really trying to set the stage of all the local dollars regarding both behavioral health and housing that are out there. It was mentioned earlier, CalAIM, or the transitional rent, which is a new Medi-Cal managed care benefit that goes live January 2026 for individuals with behavioral health needs. And so really at the local level, trying to set the stage for flex housing pools, additional dollars as part of our Proposition 35 expenditure plan. How do we build out the capacity at the local level to really pull dollars together, create that transition? So for example, the first 6 months of transitional rent is covered by the Medi-Cal managed care plan, moving on to then the 30% housing intervention dollars under BHSA. So really trying to build that continuum of housing support for individuals with behavioral health needs. And so we're very excited about this. We have what we called our BHSA County Policy Manual coming out with different modules. We've released 2 modules, final modules that outline the planning process, outlining the local budgets, buckets, and how those dollars can be used, and really how do we pull these dollars together. We have additional modules coming out regarding our integrated plan template, which is really the vehicle by which counties demonstrate to us how they're pulling together their partners, the contributors at the local level to develop a plan to serve individuals with behavioral health needs, not just with one funding source, but all the funding sources at the local level. So very excited about that coming out in the coming months, and continuing to work with our partners and counties and stakeholders as we continue to develop the policy. So that was a quick overview.
That was great. Thank you, Director Bass. I just want to say the 30%, the housing support dollars in this reform are so critical as we really seek out the best possible outcomes for people with severe mental health challenges placed in the housing that we are all jointly trying to bring to scale. And I would say a part of the $6.4 billion, $2.2 billion, roughly $2.2 billion that we are administering. And I just want to say the partnership on almost half of that, a little over $1 billion with Secretary Sin and her team to focus on the veteran population is so critical here. In fact, all of this, when you think of, Secretary Johnson mentioned connecting the pieces. This is the mission of CAL-ICH. And I think Prop 1 is a great test of how people around this table are working together to ensure that then the coordination, just as effective as it's happening here in this body, happens at the local level. I talked to a lot of developers who are knocking on doors of mental health, county mental health offices, trying to understand how this works and vice versa. So everything really reflects on how well we're working at the state level. And on that, I just want to say, from guidance, preparation, and delivery to timing the funding opportunities to making awards, everything with Director Bass's team, my team, Calvet, other people around this table just has been phenomenal. I also want to praise our amazing Deputy Secretary for Homelessness, Dakshika Wigrama, who's been, a key part of the planning and execution of our side of Prop 1 dollars. This program really builds off our popular, well-known HomeKey program. In fact, we kind of rebranded HomeKey to be HomeKey Plus for the more than $2 billion of Prop 1 resources. This program, as you remember, used to quickly increase supply of permanent, interim and permanent housing by converting, that's how it started back in the COVID years, by converting hotels and motels into housing at record time and record cost. This is the challenge, right, in the state of California. How do you deliver new homes at reduced cost? $234,000 per door, which is unheard of when you're thinking about putting a new home online, especially with the supportive services that are needed for someone who's transitioning out of homelessness to thrive. And so this is what this program HomeKey delivers: 16,000 units of home, about 12,000 of them fully occupied. And Prop 1 HomeKey Plus follows this model with the goal of creating an additional 4,000 permanent supportive housing units statewide. As I said, about roughly $1 billion available for the veteran population, and another roughly $1.1 billion for people for units targeting people with severe mental health challenges. The drivers of this is cost and speed. Again, following the HomeKey model. We have a new construction and a gap financing bucket that is intended to start construction within 6 months of award. We are expecting the first set of awards to happen this month. 24 months to complete construction, 27 months to be fully occupied. And when you're talking about money for conversion, so again, underused assets converted to housing, hotels, motels, offices, commercial facilities, 12 months to complete construction and 15 months to achieve full occupancy. So cost and speed are the drivers of this program. And under support, I just want to say it is critical that we go through many rounds of pre-application consultations with every county, city, and their partners in order to ensure that we will get to meet the cost and speed drivers of this program, and that we get to the 4,000 permanent supportive housing units statewide as quickly as possible. So that is the additional $2 billion in Prop 1 resources that are co-administered between HCD and Calvet.
Right, and to follow on with that a little bit, first, I think it's really important that we recognize something that both of you touched on, Directors Boss and Velasquez, and that's not only a collaborative effort that has occurred around this table, thanks to so many of all of you for the work that we've done together, but also the speed with which we have actually gotten housing out the door, the speed with which BCHIP has been released. And that's a consistent and concerted effort building upon, I think, a history of working together. A good example is between HCD and Calvet, the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program that was funded a decade ago. From NOFA guideline creation to actually construction award was a good 18 months, not even talking about the time it took for occupancy to happen. And now to know that we are able to go from award to occupancy in 15 months potentially, that's astounding. And that is directly related to the work that our teams have done around this table among our agencies and departments. It's also significant that the governor puts those expectations on us as his team and says, we need to get this done. So Prop 1 really is, I think, a wonderful culmination and example of kind of a legacy of continuing to lean in on homelessness, housing, and the need that California really has to create better housing for all of our different populations, including those living with behavioral health and mental health challenges. And so this is a culmination of that in so many ways. The governor's leadership here, the legislature, and then the voters of California who put this together, and then all of our teams. You know, I'm grateful to the teams I've had the chance to work with over the last 2.5 years on this, including my own folks at Calvet. They've done a phenomenal job, and also with Gustavo's team as well at HCD, and then at agency for both agencies. So thanks for that. We're excited about this because it really is just the next iteration in veteran housing that we can provide. So we're looking at, we've done about 34 pre-application consultations. That's entities coming to us and talking about the potential to build and apply to build this housing. Out of that, 7 applications have been received for the gap financing that Gustavo mentioned, and then 16 of the 39 have been received for veteran serving specific applications that we'll be working with. So in addition to working with HCD in terms of the receiving and consulting with the entities that are going to apply for this, we've also done quite a bit around the space of facilitating some of the partnerships with local jurisdictions, veteran stakeholder providers, service providers, and local public housing authority, and the VA, as a VA also plays a piece in this. As far as the main support here, I think one thing we're really looking at is what happens with things like HUD-VASH vouchers. So this is the vouchers that can, as project-based vouchers, can be released. We have an opportunity to assign those to the different projects that could be awarded. So a key part of our relationship is going to be to continue to work with VA and through those local housing authorities who have the vouchers to make the case to give those HUD-VASH vouchers, project-based vouchers to those facilities. So we also have the opportunity through the support that we can provide to provide a potential applicant with guidance on lead services, offer assistance in connecting with known qualified providers, and then continuing to work with VA Homeless National programs as well. That also includes coordinating follow-up meetings with potential applicants to workshop strategies to obtain the commitment of those project-based vouchers and to work with those housing authorities. So another thing to mention about Prop 1 is not only is it a multi-pronged approach among all of our agencies and departments, but it also requires us to, and I mentioned this in our March meeting as well, really think about housing first and think about those wraparound services. So I think a key component of what we've been doing, in addition to some of this technical assistance in partnership with HCD, is really thinking and imagining what supportive services in these units is going to look like for these target populations. So that's a key part of our work, whether we're talking about the full service partnerships on the BHSA side, as that comes into effect in July in 2026, but also within the housing itself that we're building through the $1 billion. How are we going to really focus those supportive services appropriately? So again, this has just been an incredible partnership because it's given us the opportunity to really benefit from everything we've learned over this last decade plus of building housing and how we can accelerate that, how we can make it faster, and how we can continue to focus on meeting the needs of these populations with this money. So it's exciting times right now. As Director Boss mentioned, this is great. Thanks.
Thank you, council members. I appreciate the presentation. Before we continue on in the agenda, do other council members have questions or comments for the panelists?
This was the most comprehensive explanation of Prop 1 and all the different ways that it's distributed and divvied up that I've received. So thank you. And I have been closely following. Grateful to hear about all of the coordination and collaboration and thoughtfulness right behind trying to really provide community-based settings for folks that are the sickest that are also living outdoors. I do have a couple of questions. One, both for HCD and CalVet. I just want to hear a little bit more about the pre-application consultation because I think it's a great idea to really make sure everybody's time is well spent, right? And that the applications submitted are thoughtful and in line with what you want. But can you talk a little bit more about that practice and like what it actually entails? Is it to understand whether or not folks, whether it's local jurisdictions or private agencies will make thresholds? Is it to like say a little bit more about that process? Because I think there's some possibilities to learn a little bit for that. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. And then I'll save my other question for after you go.
I can start. Or you prefer to start? Okay. I mean, I believe that one of the reasons why HomeKey has been a successful model is precisely because we required a pre-application consultation before any county or city applied to that program. It is, in the state, we're all familiar with webinars that all of our teams put together where, people show up virtually and it's like one time all, just flooding information. But what the pre-application consultation gives you is like a dedicated team of people that are answering questions post-webinar about specifics, criteria and requirements and features that cities and counties and their partners want to execute. They know their community best. They come to us. Okay, this may not fit what I heard. Okay, so we clarified during the pre-application consultation how they can modify things to come forth with a successful plan. And I think that again, just quite frankly, is what has made HomeKey a good program. People value that dedicated technical assistance prior to submitting a plan, and it benefits us tremendously because the review of the application is faster. It really tries to fit the criteria better with our guidelines, and we're doing it for HomeKey Plus Prop 1, and it's worked quite well, including the consultations that Secretary Sin mentioned.
Yeah, and I would add, as HCD and CalVet have this history of a working relationship with the VHHP program, it's clear that HCD handles the finances, and that should always be. We're not playing with the numbers here. So our role in that really is to connect some of these entities who may apply with those lead service providers. In particular, in the veteran space, the ecosystem of what services, what benefits might be available from the federal government, or who specifically in the community is more experienced with serving veterans specifically. Those are the folks that we want to make sure these applicants are connected with, and the pre-application process gives us the chance to do that, gives us a chance to, again, coordinate with the local housing authorities on HUD-VASH as well. So I think it's a good kind of marriage of effort there, because you can have an applicant look at that from not just the financial side and the feasibility side, but then also continue to work with those folks in the community who are really going to make the application and eventually the project more successful.
Yeah, that's really great. Again, really thoughtful. And I know that every department can't afford to do those kinds of things. And obviously, because of the deep investment related to building or converting buildings, you have to do it. But I would implore us to think about where that might be appropriate for other funding streams, because I think that it's really critical. And I want to say HAP being one of those in addition to the plans. So the next thing is the saving costs, saving time, right? I think it's a critical core component of what you're trying to do. But obviously, depending on the local jurisdiction, the planning departments, et cetera, sometimes at 50, I have 3 home key projects, very proud. We opened our first affordable housing one this summer, right? Because of the best home key round, I'll say. Once we had learned everything, but obviously because of just all of the bureaucracy and convoluted, complicated entitlement and other criteria related to building things, sometimes there's just unavoidable delays. And so just curious to understand, because and I also understand because I have 3 home key projects, right? Those timelines and having to submit an update, but just want to understand how you are addressing that. And at the state level, I'm not even sure which department. I know it's more so a legislative thing in some ways, but are we looking at trying to mitigate some of those delays, and what does that look like, right, at the state level to try to really help folks achieve that 15-month goal in the face of all these challenging and costly delays because of bureaucracy at the local level?
Yes, no, it's a very important question because we faced anything from entitlement delays to community opposition. Is not for every, it doesn't feel like every community, right? The community they feel very empowered at the local level to weigh in on a project to house people who experience homelessness, that even if the provisions of the law indicate, things like CEQA exemptions and land use conformity, still with all those provisions, it takes time. Surprisingly, most of the delays, because yes, there's been some considerable delays in some projects, the minority of the home portfolio really, it's due mostly because of, delays in materials and labor shortages and those kinds of things that have not been necessarily related with the local processes to entitle, approve, and permit home key projects. But I would say yes, in some instances we have seen those barriers play out, and they have caused some delays. But again, it's really not a vast majority of the home key portfolio where we've seen that, and so we continue to work on kind of refining the guidelines to make sure localities understand, especially the governing bodies, how these projects need to come into fruition as quickly as possible.
And Commissioner, Councilmember Lewis, I also just wanted to say that your question is so critical because this is the fundamental challenge. If we aren't able to cite these projects in local communities, whether they're our behavioral health projects or our PSH or what have you, then there inherently will be delays. And so I just wanted to bring us back to what Megan was talking about, which is this sort of newer space that Cal ICH staff is leaning into, which is how do we support locals to make sure that they're creating the conditions for these types of programs to move forward by showing up at council meetings, by organizing and going to boards of supervisors when there's opposition or questions about how are these projects going to impact community. I think it's a multi-pronged process, but that, in addition to what Director Velasquez says in terms of our program guidelines, but we have to make sure that our local communities are welcoming these efforts as they continue to have challenges around folks experiencing homelessness. We're bringing solutions and we need them to say yes to those solutions. So I just wanted to tie those two pieces together.
That Secretary Moss, I did want to offer 2 concrete examples. One I think I spoke about in the March meeting, but Advisory Committee member Roxanne Lewis, who's a director in Monterey County, graciously applied for, on behalf of her colleagues in Santa Cruz County, an encampment resolution fund that was awarded, and I think was on her 3rd city council meeting, and plus or minus 4 hours in length, where city council persons are asking for information that's not really important to the actual implementation of the program. And we're talking, this project was for 30 people, I believe. So a small project by comparison. That should never be the reality, that a county director or a city director, a local partner is having to go back and back and back to justify the need and the importance of a project like this. So just another opportunity for Cal ICH to support the good works, and of course alerting the departments who administer those funds of where those bottlenecks are occurring.
Thank you so much. I pretty much love everything about this, right? The change from MHSA to BHSA, that we can now not treat substance use as some separate, like, moral problem, but a medical problem that it has always been. I just have, I guess, two quick questions. I love the speed, the conversion. Home key is one of my favorite things, but one is actually a question about, is it written into it, or how are we thinking about how much is community-based versus how much is more sort of an institutional care? Because you certainly notice at some of the messaging events, there's like a big emphasis on these buildings that kind of look like hospitals. And I'm just wondering, how is that formula, like, do those count as a 30% housing, or is that a totally different thing? And is the public aware of that? So that's the first question. Maybe I'll ask my second, because that maybe is also just an overall messaging, because this is so essential, but it's really focusing on a very small part of the population of people experiencing homelessness. And in fact, some of these dollars hopefully will be used for some people who are not yet experiencing homelessness, because they also need the intensive mental health substance use treatment that could be covered by this. And I do sometimes worry that we are going to grab defeat from the hands of victory, or something, that this will be executed really well. We will do a really, really, really important thing. We will get services and housing to the most high need population. But the public will look at the point in time count and say, it didn't work, it was a failure, when it was never really meant to address, right, homelessness writ large. So I'm just wondering how we're thinking about that messaging. How can we say to the public, this is for an incredibly important subpopulation that we care deeply about, that the public cares deeply about, that we also care deeply about. But even if it's incredibly successful, it alone won't end our crisis in our state.
I'll take your first question, which I think was the 30% housing intervention dollars. Are those being used to support the BCHIP projects? And no. So the housing intervention dollars are really intended to be rental assistance, rental subsidies, operating subsidies, that kind of lane of work. The BCHIP, or the bond funded behavioral health facilities, are health facilities. And so Medi-Cal will cover the services and supports their commercial coverage, et cetera. So different, this is really treatment versus housing interventions. And then with regard to your second question, this is one of the things we're thinking about as we're setting our quality measures for all of this work. We have a quality and equity advisory committee where we've set some phase 1 measures in homelessness. Reducing homelessness is one of the goals. We have 14 goals, but trying to develop lanes to identify, it's not just homeless, it's individuals with behavioral health needs who are homeless. How are we moving that mark, and kind of using the data to kind of demonstrate, what was it, baseline essentially, and where it has moves over the course of the years as a result. But that's the work we're kind of striving to dig into a little bit more on. How do you identify really population health, behavioral health goals, right? And how do you start to define what you're going to measure and attribute to the work that we have here, that we have with CalAIM, that we have with Beach Connect, and all of the levers that we are all driving towards over the last few years to really address. There's 14 goals that we're working with Public Health, Department of Public Health on as well, to really kind of have this population perspective on what is going on.
Just thinking about how this all intersects, right? And in LA, I've been a part of the Care First community investment effort for the last 5 years. And so is alternatives to incarceration one of your goals? And is that connected to, because obviously that plays a big role in terms of the glaring number of people with mental health conditions that are incarcerated because of that. So is that a part of the effort as well? I mean, is that a part of one of the 14 goals, or is it a part of the through line of the conversations?
Yes, reducing incarceration, not necessarily alternatives, but kind of that is one of the 14 goals. It's one of the priority populations for BHSA. And so really trying to align these population health goals with kind of what the objectives of BHSA were.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to add this sort of idea, part of what we've been trying to think about is that there is a housing continuum that needs to be resourced from everyone who is unhoused, extremely low income, affordable housing to first-time home buyers. And so I think your point is well taken that the segment of folks who are most impacted by behavioral health challenges, substance use disorders, and the lack of affordable housing is really the smaller tranche. And I think that storytelling is really important because that is what HomeKey Plus is really targeting. And yet we need resources along the rest of the continuum to look at prevention, to look at some of our families who are experiencing homelessness, our young people. So it's a good reminder that we need to communicate who these resources serve and get much more strategic about the rest of our resources and how they intersect throughout the continuum. So I just appreciate the point.
Fantastic. Any final questions before we move on? Alrighty. Yeah, that was a great discussion. I had to tap Cody on the back. I said, this is great. Council members should present at every council meeting because it's such a robust conversation that comes from it. So thank you all. Moving on to our next agenda item, where again, we will hear from council members. One of the most important roles of this council is to ensure that our collective investments are aligned, and specifically now aligned with our new statewide action plan to prevent and end homelessness. And that we're accountable. We talk about accountability all the time, but that we too are accountable for the outcomes that we seek to achieve. So today we'll hear from several of our council member departments, Department of Social Services, CalVet, DHCS, and HCD. They'll walk us through how their key AB 977 homelessness programs are structured in the action plan goals, their performance metrics that they use, and how they monitor progress. You'll see that accountability shows up in a variety of ways, through performance-based funding, rigorous reporting requirements, and enforcement mechanisms like corrective action plans and funding clawbacks. After we hear from council members, Sydney Bennett, who's our Director of Data and Research, will provide a brief orientation to the council on data updates that CalICH has now embedded in our quarterly updates to the council, which were included in the meeting materials. We'll spend most of the 90 minutes, though, allotted for this item discussing where opportunities exist to align, with the goal of the discussion being to build a shared understanding of how data, reporting, and oversight help us continuously improve and better serve Californians at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So I ask that council members please hold questions until we have heard from all of our presenters. And with that, I will pass it to Hana Azamati, who is representing CDSS today. Hana? And definitely stay in their seats. I'll man the slides from up here.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm Hana Azamati, Deputy Director for the Housing and Homelessness Division within the California Department of Social Services, and I'm here today on behalf of Director Troya. I'm really excited to present to you about the Bringing Families Home program, the Housing Supports program, as well as the Housing and Disability Advocacy program. CDSS is really excited to have had the privilege to invest in tailored, targeted, and client-centered programs like these that focus on serving families, older adults, and people with disabilities who are at really complex intersections of experience with homelessness that also involves child welfare involvement, disability, intergenerational poverty, as well as aging. Each of our programs is embedded within the broader social safety net and helps eligible clients who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness secure housing and achieve long-term housing stability. Again, I'm going to present on 3 of those programs specifically and provide you with a little bit of background as well as how we track progress and how we ensure accountability of success. So just for for some background on each of these programs, they each provide a set of flexible and tailored resources that can include housing navigation, case management, as well as rental subsidies and other resources that help the specific populations that they're targeting achieve stability. So they're sort of positioned to do whatever it takes to get someone into housing or prevent their homelessness and help them to stabilize in housing. So for the Bringing Families Home program, that program is specifically focused on families that are engaged in the child welfare system and experiencing or at risk of homelessness. The HSP program, Housing Support Program, focuses on families that are in receipt of CalWORKs. And the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program focuses on those that are likely eligible for disability benefits. I actually brought a short fact sheet in case any of you are interested in learning more. So I will just pass that around and you can find it on our website as well if I didn't bring enough copies. So hopefully I did. All three of these programs are currently allocation based, though they were previously operated as competitive programs and may shift again in the future depending on statutory or budget directives. And they're delivered through counties as well as in the case of HDAP and BFH by tribes and tribal entities. So that's what you see in those next two sort of second and third row. Now, in terms of goals of these programs, again, each program aims to prevent or end homelessness and support long-term housing stability. Though in the case of the Bringing Families Home program, there are the additional goals of reducing foster care engagement as well as placements, as well as improving family reunifications. And the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program also has the additional goal of connecting individuals to disability benefits, which we think of as like a critical step and resource toward achieving housing stability. These investments are each aligned with goals 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the action plan because they move people into housing, they increase system coordination, they prioritize equity, and they ensure that resources are used effectively. So now you can see the sort of core set of performance indicators in that second row that we use to track performance, ensure accountability, as well as direct technical assistance to continuously improve outcomes for clients. So these include spending rates, rates of permanent housing placements, equity across service connections, housing retention at and after exit to the program, and success in disability benefit advocacy applications in the case of HDAP. These programs all require monthly or quarterly reporting and submission of annual updates from our grantees as well. So just a little bit about what we're seeing from all of this data, because we've been doing a ton of work to try to improve the data that we're receiving from grantees to make sure that it's actionable, and then to actually put it to use, because it's not enough to just have data sitting in our reports, but we are trying to find ways to really use it to drive performance. And we've been seeing some really remarkable outcomes. Still, of course, always room to improve, but I just want to share a couple of highlights that I think really demonstrate the importance of integrating housing within the systems that people are already engaged with, whether it's health or it's social services, as in the case of these programs. What we're seeing is that in fiscal year 23-24, for instance, 50% of HDAP participants, 53% of HSP participants, and 54% of Bringing Families Home participants all exited to permanent housing. And that's compared to 35% of participants in the broader homeless services systems in California. So just really proud that we're able to see these results. Again, more improvement to be done, but especially considering the high barriers that these populations face, we're really excited to see that with, for example, HDAP participants experiencing at 43% of HDAP participants experience chronic homelessness at entry into the program. So to be able to see that success is really remarkable. Bringing Families Home, similarly, we know that families that are engaged in Bringing Families Home have even higher needs and rates of maltreatment prior to entering the program than other child welfare involved families. So we're really targeting the most vulnerable and seeing them succeed. And that's reflected in housing retention rates as well, and other metrics that we've been able to get through the reporting and external evaluations. So that's a little bit about just the data that we collect, the data that we are able to see. In terms of oversight and enforcement, we have lots of specific requirements, including around reporting and engagement and technical assistance. But what we we really try to center is in our accountability, how do we find ways to partner with our grantees to overcome some of the challenges that they're each sort of collectively facing in helping participants in the programs actually succeed in connecting to housing and retaining that housing. So we've invested a lot in technical assistance in trying to understand the barriers that participants face and then find ways to overcome them and spotlight when grantees are finding unique or innovative ways to approach common challenges. So that's been a lot of the work that we've been doing to try to, again, see success in these programs on the ground so that participants in them can thrive. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. We'll move on to Secretary Sin for Calvet.
Okay, well, happy to give an update on our pilot project, Veteran Support to Self-Reliance. So this is a program that was included in the 2023-24 budget. This is $25 million as a pilot project to examine and look at ways that we could increase veteran housing stability within permanent supportive housing among the 55 plus population. So as a reminder, roughly 10,000 veterans are homeless in California on any given night. Well over half of them are unsheltered. So it's not just a matter, of course, with any of our unhoused population of getting someone into and connecting them with housing, but also making sure they thrive in the setting they're in. And with our older veterans, we see that higher acuity often leads to worse outcomes in trying to maintain stable housing. So this is a project that was specifically intended to study ways and provide additional resources to potentially, build more success around this. And I think we have some really good data to share. So first, let's see. I got to read all this now. Let's see. So I talked about the 25 million. So Calvet awarded 6 grants through a competitive NOFA process, with each grantee implementing an enhanced supportive services model in San Diego, the Inland Empire, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Sonoma, and Sacramento. The grantees collectively serve roughly 430 veterans through their enhanced supportive services model. The pilot enables a range of services through various staffing models, including healthcare navigation, mental health counseling, mobility and accessibility services, peer support, transportation assistance, meal and nutrition support, and in-unit services for habitability and daily living. Additionally, therapeutic and social activities such as art therapy, cooking classes, walking groups, and communal meals are provided to reduce isolation and foster social engagement. So we are now we've just completed the first year of this 3-year pilot, and we've asked RAND Corporation to evaluate the metrics. And what we've seen so far after the first year is major improvements in the following categories. So in health behaviors, missed medical appointments declined by 81%, use of specialty care increased by 29%, medication adherence increased by 17%, and alcohol use dropped by 65%. In acute care utilization, emergency visits and ambulance calls decreased by more than 50%. For social engagement, we saw participation in group activities more than doubled for this population, including that people were just leaving their units more frequently. In food security, we saw that the percentage of veterans eating 3 meals a day also nearly doubled. So we've also required our grantees to enter this information into their local HMIS system, which is part of AB 977 requirements. And I think the expectation is that then rolls up into the HGIS system overall. So we'll be able to continue to share this information and then report out additional successes as the program moves forward into years 2 and 3. That's it.
Thank you, Secretary Sin. We will move on to Councilmember Boss.
So I'm going to cover the Behavioral Health Bridge Housing Program, which we call BHBH. But through this program, we've awarded just over $1 billion to 57 county behavioral health departments and 16 tribal entities to operate bridge housing settings to address the immediate needs of individuals. So these dollars are really intended to kind of bridge to permanent supportive housing, bridge to other options, particularly even under BHSA and the 30% housing intervention. So really serving as kind of a bridge to permanent opportunities. As of December 2024, the program has served over 5,000 individuals, and programs began operating the winter of 2023. As of 2020, the end of 2024 as well, 2,100 beds are operational and supported by either infrastructure or services funding. And an additional 4,700 beds will be funded annually through rental assistance programs, shelter interim housing, or other funding to facilitate assisted living. By the end of the 27 fiscal year, so June 30, 2027, we anticipate funding over 7,000 beds across California, with more than 3,000 of those beds being funded through infrastructure funding directly, and expanding the housing stock. And then the remaining 4,000 beds will be service funded, providing various supportive services, including behavioral health services, but not directly adding to the housing stock. So we're trying to maintain kind of understanding of how these dollars are used at the local level, and keeping count of kind of the bed counts and kind of the accountability of what is being delivered with these dollars.
Thank you so much. And we will round it out with Councilmember Velasquez.
Okay, great. Oh, these presentations are going fast.
I don't think this has ever happened, but we may wrap up early. But the discussion question is a big one, so we will leave plenty of space for that.
Great. So for HCD, I have 3 programs, but before I explain the programs, I want to just provide some context, because I think this is in conversation about metrics, and oversight of those metrics are very important. It boils down to accountability, and accountability is in HCD's bloodstream. It was always important to measure how the state of California is producing, preserving, protecting affordable housing. But this became our #1 priority, truly, when back in 2021, Governor Newsom appeared at a press conference announcing a housing accountability unit for the state. Last year, alongside Secretary Moss, the governor announced a bit of a renaming of the Housing Accountability Unit to add the word homelessness, housing and homelessness accountability unit. And this really has been, quite frankly, a small investment by the legislature in a number of staffing, from policy specialists to attorneys, but the dividends have paid tremendously. In a short period of time, just a few years, the actions, whether it's education, technical assistance, ongoing support to local jurisdictions, and enforcement as well. Meaning whether it's a notice of violation to cities and counties for not abiding to a certain aspect of a state law, to again produce and preserve or plan for the adequate level of affordable housing, but also partnering, if necessary, with the Office of the Attorney General. I have to give a lot of credit also to Attorney General Bonta, who has partnered with us to take some of these cases to court and successfully either settled or win in court. And we, the facilitation of this kind of accountability oversight has led to unlocking more than 8,000. We have a dashboard on HCD's website that accounts basically based on all the accountability actions we take, how many units actually become unlocked as a result of that work. And it's roughly 8,500, but that is just actions of this small group of people. Then the oversight to things like the Surplus Land Act, which is when jurisdictions dispose of surplus land, that triggers notice and requirements so that that land is first available to developers that want to build affordable housing. And because of that oversight, 32,000 new units have been unlocked. It's not that they have been built, but the actions will lead to the potential for thousands and thousands of more affordable homes in the state. So as we look at these 3 programs, I mentioned, HomeKey earlier in the Prop 1 presentation because of HomeKey Plus, and I mentioned the drivers, right? Cost of speed. Those are metrics, of course, but you do need to have the oversight in place, the attention to how you're going to measure that those metrics get accomplished. And These three programs, have now been embedded in our infrastructure for accountability, where the metrics that we worked on with our partners at the local level to select, those metrics have also the appropriate level of oversight and accountability checks. And so the first one is HAP, which, as you know, very popular program with localities, the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program that provides, and this is why it's popular, because it provides flexible resources. This includes continuums of care, of course, can be used in a variety of ways to support the creation of more interim housing units, permanent supports, navigation outreach. Is non-competitive, is based on a block grant formula based on PIT counts. And the grantee receives the funding upfront. It is not a reimbursement program. So for many of those reasons, it's a popular program. We are in round 6, which is the first round that we are administering after the transition from CAL-ICH to HCD. As you know, the governor talks about these regional homelessness coordination action plans and MOUs that need to exist between cities and counties to improve homelessness outcomes. And one of the things that we've improved under HAP 6, the latest round, is how do we go about ensuring that the jurisdictions are spending fast enough these dollars? Only when they obligate and spend the money quickly is that we are going to see the outcomes that we all desire. So, for example, to receive the first 50% of HAP 6 funds, awardees must fully obligate all of the funds from rounds 1 through 3 and spend all of the HAP round 1 funds. That is something that has, really created great momentum in the program to ensure that, okay, we have metrics, we know what the outcomes we desired are, but we are going to ensure that in this latest round, we have metrics that speak to the speed, to the level in which jurisdictions have to spend these resources. So that is to receive the first round of HAP funding. To receive the second disbursement, there are even harder conditions, such as obligating at least 75% and spend 50% of the round 6 allocations by 2027. There are corrective plans that can be set as part of this mid-award update. Includes updates on expenditures and obligations of activities, progress on system performance. Obviously, the connection with data entered into HDIS is critical. If progress is insufficient, we can prescribe corrective action. We are, of course, monitoring that if gaps exist, there are strategies that localities are identifying to dedicate funds from other sources, including BHSA, Prop 1 to support the investments. We want to make sure that each region identifies the number of encampments with the specific plans to address these encampments. All of this is part of, now the obligations of HAP 6 practice to address encampments must comply. We've talked about the ICH guidance, must comply with those guidance, and they have to meet those standards. Also must be compliant with the state housing laws, so they need to have a compliant housing element. They need to have no cases pending on our accountability unit. And these plans also must include engagement with persons with deep experience and service providers. So a number of features that are very important, metrics and performance standards that are very important under HAP 6, which is the latest round. And HomeKey, we talked about, I spoke about cost and speed. HomeKey grantees enter into these binding agreements that tie the disbursement once awards are made to concrete milestones, site control, permits, construction progress. At the end, each development has a recorded covenant that keeps these homes for affordable for 55 years. Every HomeKey project has a point of contact that works proactively whenever there are delays, whenever a HomeKey project is running through any shortfalls or barriers, cost overruns, missed occupancy targets, deviations from the intended population. All of this is tracked. All of this is reported. All of this goes into a dashboard that tracks the progress of our HomeKey portfolio. In cases where sponsors have failed to meet performance targets, they are assessed negative points. If you talk to developers across the state, these HCD negative points have become a big deal. And because then in future competitions for state dollars to propose more projects, if they are assessed negative points because they have underperformed in other programs like HomeKey, but what happens is the demand is so high that those negative points are basically going to take them out of the competition in a nutshell. So it is a big deal to have negative points. In some cases, we have pursued legal action to recuperate state funds to ensure that those funds are used for additional projects that are ready to go. And well, I mentioned the dashboard. And the third program is No Place Like Home, which counties must spare capital dollars with mental health services. This is also a permanent supportive housing program. There is no more money, but we went through 6 rounds, very successfully created nearly 5,000 permanent supportive housing units. And a bit kind of similar when you think about Prop 1, the support for people experiencing mental health challenges, kind of I think a lot about No Place Like Home and a similar model. Counties must commit to a formal MOU with behavioral health agencies to provide on-site and case management services, very stringent loan and grant agreements, very stringent service plans for this population, and same covenants for 55 years, and annual performance checks, site monitoring audits are ongoing under the No Place Like Home program. So just a lot of very productive, positive metrics to alleviate the crisis of homelessness, but the oversight and the fact that we've set in place this infrastructure of the Housing and Homelessness Accountability Unit at HCD, that has been a blessing in the sky that is making us demonstrate that progress is being felt as a result of accountability checks and balances.
Thank you, Director Velasquez. And now we'll ask for Sydney Bennett, again, CalICH's Director of Data and Research, to come up and join us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sydney Bennett, the Director of Data and Research at CalICH, and pleased to be here with you all again this afternoon. As hopefully you saw in your council meeting materials, CalICH provided our first quarterly data report, which is a request that came out of our March council meeting, and we plan to provide these reports each quarter with the council meeting materials moving forward. The report will include progress towards the goals set forth in the action plan, as well as data from the state-funded homelessness programs that report into HMIS and get aggregated in HDIS as part of AB 977's requirements. So you'll see the first image on the slide looks at the action plan goals. The current action plan doesn't start until 2025, so we don't actually currently have data for progress in this action plan period, but we thought that it was still helpful to provide data for calendar year 2024 so that we have an even more updated data on kind of what our baseline looks like going into this action plan period. Goals 1, 2, and 3 are the goals that are calculated using only HDIS data. So those are the 3 goals that we have updated information for you all today. Goal 4 will be working with HCD to provide an update once their annual progress report data is available. And then for goal 5, we are still working with our HHS partners on the methodology, and then we'll have updates on that goal as well. But I did want to highlight those first 3 goals today. So for goal 1, we're looking at the percentage of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness who enter into shelter and housing. And so we do see that decrease a little bit from 2023 to 2024 from 40% to 39%. For goal 2, we're looking at the percent of people entering into permanent housing destinations. And so that went from 18% in 2023 to 17% in 2024. And then goal 3 looks at housing retention. So for those who are exiting the homelessness response system into permanent housing, whether they return to homelessness within 6 months. And so we saw that hold steady from 2023 to 2024. The other graph that we see looks at data from all AB 977 projects aggregated together. So it's quite a wide range of services from the 14 programs that report into HMIS as part of 977. So this data point is focused on exit destinations, which is one of the key outcomes that we look at CalICH, and it sounds like many of our partner departments are looking at as well. So we're seeing that for prevention programs, that 87% of participants are either remaining in their permanent housing or moving into different permanent housing, and only 2% are entering into homelessness upon exiting, which I think is a really positive outcome from our prevention work that's funded by the state. For those exiting permanent housing, we're seeing 9% entering into homelessness. Many people are staying in permanent housing within the system for many years. So those people aren't counted in this because they're not exiting, but still some work to do around permanent housing retention. And then we're seeing that for those who are accessing crisis response services, such as street outreach or shelter, only 23% are immediately entering into permanent housing at the end of those services. So a lot of work still to do in terms of getting people from those crisis services into permanent housing, but we do see many are entering into temporary housing. And so hopefully that's a step in that path. The staff from the administering departments have access to dashboards with much more detailed information specific to their programs that can be broken down for different demographic groups for different continuums of care. So this is just kind of the high level, but we hope that you all are really digging into this information as you learn about your program outcomes. CalICH plans to continue to refine this report and continue to expand our analysis of both the action plan goals in our annual updates, as well as the data from the 977 program. So if there's other data that would be of interest to you in your department, we are always happy to talk data with your teams. I will pass it back to Megan.
Thank you, Sydney. This is truly amazing. From the point in time that I started in March of 2023, and the action plan was a sort of a collection, a list of investments from the state under the leadership of co-chairs Johnson and Moss. We have metrics embedded and the powerhouse that HDIS has become because the grantees that you all are responsible for are inputting into the system. This is a world away from where we started. So thank you all. Thank you to your staff. And thank you to Sydney and her team for this fantastic work. I'll move us on. Before we get to the discussion question, are there any questions for the folks who presented today? And I should have made it a little bit more clear. We heard from some of the 14 AB 977 programs and projects today. The intention is to hear from the remainder in a future council meeting. So thank you to the 4 who started us off. Thank you for laying the way. But Councilmember Lewis, you have a question.
Thank you all for your presentations. Those numbers are amazing. And I always think about the fact that those are souls that we're talking about, right? As we talk about percentages, these are people's lives that we're saving, changing, restoring hope, in addition to obviously giving folks a safe place to live. So congratulations and thank you for all the hard work that each of your departments and agencies are doing. I have 3 distinct things that I want to say. So I'm going to ask the first 2 questions first. So within the first year of being on this council, which I was so excited to be a part of, one of the things I kept bringing up that we really haven't talked about for quite some time is, for me, part of the improvement as it relates to outcomes is not just connected to the metrics for the participants, it's connected to how effectively we are able to reduce administrative burdens and think about the policies and practices of your respective departments and agencies in administering the dollars, as well as the grantees in particular, you know, when it's local jurisdictions that are then administering the dollars, to make sure that we are not creating burdens for service providers and creating unnecessary administrative burden for the the programs to operate. And so one of the things I just want to lift up and offer is, I understand this is a milestone and we're actually looking at data individually as departments and increasingly looking at it collectively, at least initially for the folks that are connected to HGIS. But I want to put that back on the table because it has not come up in this space for a very long time. And I can tell you, I'm familiar with, not as familiar with Calvet, but I'm familiar with everything else that was said. And I also can say on the ground, there's still some challenges. And to be clear, not at the expense of the very thoughtful accountability measures, right? And I love when there's teeth in the policy, like there's a consequence for it. So not at the expense of those things, but there are still some policies and practices that make it burdensome to administer these dollars. And I want to, at some point in the next year, make sure that as our departments are talking about improvements and movement, that is connected, that there's an outcome connected to that. So as an example, and I don't want to call you out, HAP is life-changing. It's been life-saving for thousands of people across the state. The jurisdictions don't get the money until 8 months in, which means the providers are holding on to accounts payable of millions of dollars that they can't get reimbursed for 8 to 9 months. Like that kind of thing, it's critical to the point where some providers are like, we can't do it this year, right? Because we can't hold 8 months worth of funding to wait for our COCs, cities and counties to get it. And so that's not the only example, but it's the one that I'm hearing about across the state. So those are examples of like, when we're looking at the amazing work being done, just being mindful of your policies at the state level, but also when I talked about like maybe having the pre-consultations with HAP, I meant like, how are your local jurisdictions administering, right? Are you all creating burdens and have policies that are that don't support the mission at the state level, and or are the local jurisdictions that you're giving the dollars to creating those, right? So I just want to put that back. I haven't said that in a long time, but I think hearing these amazing numbers, I think they're great. And I want to make sure that this process also includes improving outcomes and improving access to resources for the organizations and local jurisdictions that have to grant them. The second thing is, I would love to hear, because I didn't hear anybody talk about equity, right? And equity, regardless of what's happening at the federal level, is still a core part of what this council is committed to. And so just really quickly about how the departments that did share, how you're monitoring and reviewing, or whether or not you've gotten to the point where you can understand whether or not disparities are shifting or reducing, or the inequities are being addressed, because I didn't hear any of you talk about that. So I would love to hear that briefly. And then I do have one more specific question for CDSS. I know that was a lot, so thank you for listening.
Start on the equity question, because that is, I mentioned the population health, the behavioral health, population health goals that we developed is related to our behavioral health transformation, BHSA specifically. But in each of those, we are having an equity lens, or kind of a specific metric to kind of really evaluate in those areas as we go through the various kind of more refinements of those measures. So I don't have anything specific on the BHBH that I discussed, but it is central to our kind of overall population goals.
For those excellent questions. On equity, actually there is some information also in the fact sheet that I handed out, but for CDSS's housing and homelessness programs, we look really closely at the data that we have available to track both connections to the services by race, ethnicity, and other characteristics, but also in terms of the outcomes. And what we're seeing is that, knowing that homelessness in California is disproportionately impacting people of color, Black and Indigenous people in particular, what we're finding is that compared to each of the comparison groups that are appropriate for the programs, given the tailored focus on the populations that they have, HDAP and HomeSafe, which is a program I didn't speak to, but that's very similar to the other programs I described with a specific different population, serve a similar or higher proportion of those populations. And then the Bringing Families Home program also serves a similar proportion of Hispanic and Black children in particular. The housing support program, that's a program where we're still working on getting better data to be able to analyze actually at that level in terms of equity. So that's something that's in the works, and hopefully in the future we can report on. But right now we can only work with aggregate level data. That makes it harder to analyze and report.
Can I just say for HomeSafe, I think it's important that we have this conversation about what is the appropriate comparison population, because it's a higher proportion than are Black folks in the state by far. It's a similar proportion to Black folks served by APS, but it's a lower proportion than the proportion of Black folks who experience the proportion of people experiencing homelessness who are Black. And I think that for all of these, when we talk about equity, we should have open discussions. I'm sort of wearing another hat here because wearing my UCSF hat, we're doing the Home Safe evaluation, and we've had a lot of discussion around that. And I think it's always important when we say, like, what is the comparison population? Are we talking about the proportion of Black folks in the state? That I think we could all agree isn't right. Are we talking about the proportion of Black folks who use the overall service? So it was clear that if people came to APS, you were Black, you're more likely to get Home Safe. But if we think it's like, actually, well, how about the Black folks how about the proportion of people experiencing homelessness who are Black, then it's an underrepresentation. And so I just, not to be controversial, but I do just want to say out loud that when you talk about equity, you need to be really thoughtful, because different people could interpret, they're all right in one way, but we should just be clear about what comparisons we're making.
I'll just underscore that point and appreciate that, Dr. Cashel. And I think you also have to put it in the context of how these programs sit. So social services programs that you just heard Hannah reference are sitting within the safety net umbrella. So child welfare disparity and disproportionality exists. Who's then accessing services with it, right? So there's a whole lot of unpacking and layering that we should be thinking about. You can also answer the question in relationship to funding. And so you heard Hannah reference and lift up some of the tribal set-asides that were put forward and look. So that's a very excellent question. And I think there's a whole maybe framework we need to maybe think about in terms of being able to answer it, where we're having some consistency so you can understand the full context of the program design itself. So just throwing it up.
I have a question. I'm just like looking at sort of the list of programs that fall under the AB 977. And there's a lot of, I guess I'm just curious, how many of those programs are still going to be receiving funding starting next year? Because like in my count, it doesn't look like a ton. And so then like, what does that do to these metrics? Are these metrics really going to just be looking at, of what we already funded, they're continuing to be successful? Or are these numbers going to like actually demonstrate that we're not going to be able to hit our metrics because we don't have funding going into these programs?
So CalICH staff have been watching not just the federal budget, but the state budget as well. Many of the AB 977 programs and projects are multi-year. So HAP, for example, I mean, we hear quite a bit from our city and our county colleagues that it's one-time funding, but it's one-time funding that takes us through, Director Velasquez, I think to 2028, if I'm not mistaken. So it's multiple years. And the same is true for a number of the 977 projects. And so we are able to evaluate for the lifespan anyway, should the funding commitments remain for what they are, we're able to evaluate those programs and projects for the life of the action plan. But I did want to just make a note that what was included in council member materials for, and that Sydney highlighted a bit of, CalICH will be including quarterly data report updates and our quarterly updates to you all. The exit destination graph was one graph that was included. There was another graph. It was exit destinations from AB 977 projects for the same time period, but their exit destination by demographic, which was really fascinating to look at. So I'm not able to pull it up on the slide, but it was included in council materials as well.
I had a question for Secretary Sen. Oh, look at that.
I don't know. We're sharing brains today. Do you want to ask your question and then I'll answer and then make a comment to follow up on Councilmember Lewis's?
Okay, just quickly. I wonder if you all had set goals for your program prior to what you saw as a result of the first year of evaluation. Because as you were talking, I was like, so, those sound amazing. are they significant enough for us to keep funding that program? Like, how do we sort of assess what success looks like if we're going to be making decisions about limited funds going toward the kinds of outcomes that you describe, if, you know, the outcomes that Hannah described are not, so I'm just curious if you all had set some of that up prior to administering.
Yes, so part of the statement of work and what we looked at for who would be granted, they had very specific measures that they needed to hit. And then Rand having received the part of the contract to do basically the evaluation. They're evaluating very specific outcomes with that. But I think that also kind of adds to the previous conversation around what equity looks like. It kind of comes down to how we apply that term, how broadly or how narrowly to each of our populations, and how well do we know our populations. And I think when we talk about equity, you know, in reference to the exit destinations table, it's very focused on looking at kind of racial breakdown, whereas there are a number of other things we need to be considering. And we obviously all know this, whether that's, you know, single parents with minor children, single parents with adult dependents. And in that space, that's where we see considerable disparities between who needs housing and what housing is available in the veteran population. And I think that's something over the years, even in Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention, the VHHP project, along with some of our mental health grant funding that we have right now, not related to housing, in another kind of pathway, we are concerned about and ensuring that our grantees are looking at the issue of equity. Because how do you put money out in, you know, 1-2 bedroom units, not considering that a family or a single woman with dependent children, who also is more likely to be a woman of color as well, may be in need of housing and not getting it because the system wasn't built for her. The housing project wasn't built for her. So I think really considering who our populations are really is the first question we need to be asking when we're talking about equity, because we can use that term very broadly. And I don't think it's intended for us to be using it quite so broadly. So.
Before we go to Councilmember DeMorris, I do just want to, for the sake of the council, we do have the ability to provide more graphs. So we can do by household type, by age, veteran status. I mean, and councilmember departments who have the 977 dashboards have access to that more granular level information. But we're happy to come back next quarter with a more robust output of what's possible to provide to you all, if that would be helpful. So, Councilmember DeMorris.
I appreciated hearing all the conversation about speed. With goal number 5, it just occurred to me now, we probably approved this at prior meetings, is that we're tracking permitting. And I wonder if it would be better to track either project completion or occupied. And do we have that data? Some of these might get hung up for a long time, or permits might get pulled.
I will give it to Director Velasquez, but I mean, just as a reminder for the 5 goals, thinking about baseline data, we needed to start with what data we had access to, and what we had immediate access to was HCD's very robust dashboards. And so there is, I acknowledge the difference between permitted units versus constructed versus occupied. But with the data sets that we have access to, we have to remain committed to the existing goal as written.
It is a factor of data availability, but I think that should be a conversation in terms of completion and occupancy. The data gets not as robust and accurate as we would want to, but I welcome that conversation if we have the opportunity to do it at a later point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to take you up on that offer about the expansion of data as well. I would like to see if Cal ICH can bring in the information about the age and the students, and then also base it on the county area, And what I would like to do is, from the Department of Education standpoint, see how we can integrate that data to our homeless educational technical advisory centers to see if the connection of what we're seeing around students experiencing homelessness match what is happening in the counties for the youth. So I would like to really see how you guys can expand that for us to look at.
And just as a reminder, what exists in HDIS is dependent on what's in HMIS, and that is for a continuum of care. Unless the project is specifically coded in such a way that we can extract that it's a city project, it's a county project, et cetera, it becomes quite difficult. So what we're seeing at this level is an accumulation, an aggregate of information from continuums of care. And in some cases, as is the case up north, we have one continuum of care that represents 7 counties. And so that can be quite complicated to do that. But what we can do in that space is, again, with age, the specific, I don't know that CD has an AB 977 project, but we can certainly do a search of sorts for it. And I'm not going to look at Sydney because I know she's burning a hole in my mind right now, but we can certainly look for things that are coded in such a way to indicate that it's a project specific to schools or to serving school age children, et cetera. So.
Okay. So my final question, which I think thankfully the conversation evolved, so it's still relevant. And as an aside, the ages of both the head of households, if it's transitional age youth, and of the children should be in HMIS. We should be able to understand what that looks like. But speaking of that part, there's a lot going on around transitional age youth, right? There's a lot of reduction of resources. There's a lot. So I had a couple of questions for CDSS and really even for Cal ICH. One, for bringing families home, we all unfortunately know sometimes the families that are reunified, sometimes the children end up back in foster care. And so want to understand if you're tracking that, because that's a very important outcome. And if not, ask that you consider it. And if you are, we begin to understand what that looks like for children that were reunified, families were housed, but the children ended up back in foster care, right? Because I think that's telling and can inform some of the program design and additional supports. And then the other thing, just in relation to I know we're still at the very beginning, but really thinking about correlation of data is critical. So for example, people leaving the foster care system, I don't know if the child welfare system is in HDIS, is it? Is child welfare? Okay. But even if there's a way to correlate and understand people who have left the foster care system, because we know that there's some really comprehensive programs that work, right, to help stabilize young people, but they're not to scale to be able to support all the young people that are timing out of foster care. And so is there a way for us to understand how many of them are actually ending up in HMIS because either they're living outdoors, end up in shelter? Can we begin to look at correlated data? Because that's going to tell the story. This is the Interagency Council on Homelessness. And while there's a lot of integration, I think that if we can look at those kind of data points in terms of the different systems that folks are touching, then we can begin to shift some of our interventions, resources, et cetera. The foster care folks are a big one because unfortunately, if they're not connected to the families or if it's just unhealthy or unsafe connection, we know that many of them are ending up on the streets. And so it would be helpful to understand, do we have that data? I guess I should have asked. I shouldn't assume we don't have it. Do we have that data?
So starting with your second question, in terms of the connection or overlap between foster care youth exiting child welfare system and then people entering homelessness system, that is in the works. We have a BUCP that we recently finalized. Actually, maybe now it's a year ago or so, just almost a year ago. And we've been working on an implementation plan around prioritized data analyses that we want to be able to do to understand overlap of various populations and their experience with homelessness and foster care. Youth are one of those priority populations, but it will just take some time. There are also some transitions that are happening in terms of the data collection processes and systems on the child welfare side that need to be completed before the kind of analysis and work that would make sense around integration is going to be would be most efficient to start.
So in closing, that's one example because Tay are on my mind since you brought up students. I think that, and it's in line with some of the action plan goals related to coordination. I would love if we could spend some time in one of these meetings trying to understand what are those different data points that are not connected to HGIS that we want to work towards at some point in the future, having correlated data. And I don't know, Dr. Kusha, if you can help with that, but I think it's worth a conversation. I know you all are working with the departments regularly, but I think that spending some time trying to figure that out, and it may be 2 to 3 to 4 years out. I understand that as well, right? I understand the complexities. I'm not oversimplifying it, but I think that conversation is worthwhile because the data tells us the stories. And these 19 agencies, I always forget if it's 18 or 19 are here because each of their departments or agencies are touching folks that are imminently at risk or already unhoused. And I think that the more we can tell the story about how they're interacting with multiple systems at the same time or subsequently, then we can really start to make adjustments and make sure the investments make sense and are maximized and reduce the number of systems folks are having to bounce around potentially.
Considering I just finished this discussion question this morning, no council member was briefed on this, but that was an excellent segue, Councilmember Lewis, too. Given the variety of strategic investments contributing towards our collective goals identified in our action plan, and new requirements that are forthcoming in legislation that passed AB 799, what are the first steps to aligning our reporting requirements, our performance metrics, and our technical assistance to grantees? That's a very big question, but look at that. We got about 50 minutes with each other. So this is what we'll be spending the majority of our time on. So I'll open it up to council members.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. Maybe I'll start by just kind of thinking about the conversation in this question and the reorganization that we are proposing. Part of what we're thinking about is all of our affordable housing programs that currently have application processes, requirements that are not harmonious to one another. A developer may have to apply to multiple programs in order to secure funding for a project. A lot of what we're trying to do in this reorganization is to continue to build on the excellent work that the legislature, the administration, Gustavo's department has done to really streamline and align some of our applications, timelines, requirements, so that when stakeholders apply for our funding, they are not having to go through multiple application processes. There's, sort of a one-stop shop, which we are also looking at implementing. So as I was listening to this conversation, I'm thinking that it's not just about who's reporting their data based on the requirement. It is about how do these programs interact with one another? Are we serving the same people? Like, are we getting 180,000 people touching each one of these systems? Or is it 60,000 of those touching some? So that's a question I haven't really been able to understand myself. Just like if Secretary Johnson's shop is touching through Prop 1, through the programs Hannah talked about, 50,000 of those folks statewide, and we are reporting on those also in HDIS. I think it would be helpful for us to think about, like, how do we actually break down the people and have some comparisons across programs? Because maybe some folks need multiple doses of programming because they have social safety net needs, housing needs, health needs, et cetera. But I think that would be really helpful as we start to build out strategy around our data reporting. Like, how do we cumulatively understand how many folks we are touching? Are they the same people? And then maybe we change program dosage strategy for individuals that we know are being served by our multiple departments and agencies.
I just want to say that is possible with HDIS. We can certainly see how many AB 977 programs, just to start, folks are being touched by or enrolled in. Just to give us an idea, we can break it down by household type, if it's a single adult versus, there's a head of household situation, how many AB 977 programs. But what the BUCP allows us to do is to hear, we've given that data to our colleagues in Health and Human Services, who then can say, HMIS is self-reported. Actually, we have many more people who are enrolled in Medi-Cal and are, engaged in county behavioral health services. So it's a two-way street of very exciting exchanges of information, but we can certainly incorporate in the next quarterly update of the folks in HMIS we'll use the baseline year of 2023. What was the average number of AB 977 programs that our population touched?
I'll just add the complexities around the question of integration. So it might be helpful for us to also, as a council, track either what we can't answer or shouldn't answer using this data set. Just to make sure everyone's tracking when we say BUCP, business use case proposal, it's the ways in which departments can exchange information and data and look across. And I think for the point, if we're trying to understand outcomes and success, and we're doing that on the context of both being housed, but also thinking about the needs of the individuals, to the conversation we had earlier around behavioral health and substance use, and what that might mean for any person walking down the street every day. How will it look different? What is the person who voted for Prop 1? What's the expectation? How will it be delivered? But I think on this data set, we need to maybe track what we also shouldn't use it for. And there's evaluations that are robust and comprehensive in some of these programs that are maybe a different source to be looking at outcomes in totality. I think it's important, again, the context around it in the intersections on the integration, meaning, to your point, Secretary Moss, coming in and out, people are moving, right? Their needs are changing. That's likely to happen. And so we shouldn't necessarily, what are we again looking at as success, right? So just putting that out there as another thought, because we're trying to build the bridges, I think, to Councilmember Lewis's points around different data information. But to your question on, just to be real specific, on youth involved in child welfare and in the various housing programs that they have as they're coming to exit, the state information on that isn't quite as robust, right? So it just might be, we have to figure out how to track and tally what we would like to know, because I think we're going to get to a lot more questions about what we'd like to know as we get information, but also maybe where we should think about the other data sources as another component.
That's an excellent point. And actually, one of the more well-received presentations that Sydney and I gave to members of the legislature was sort of an orientation of what our data is and what it is not, and sort of the limitations of each of our data sources. Not one, in a silo is not going to answer all of the questions. These are, in some cases, we're talking point in time counts that occur, every 2 years. Some communities do it every year. So the differences are important to note, and important to note value of each of the various data sources that we do have access to. So point well taken. Yeah, Hannah.
Wanted to add that I think the interpretation of the data, just to emphasize that point, is really takes a lot of subtlety, and it's going to be really complicated in terms of how it intersects with some of the changes in funding that Marina was mentioning. So as over time we look at overlaps in these populations with HDIS data, we might see increases in overlap, which could indicate homelessness is increasing because more people are accessing services. It could also mean that services are increasing as Prop 1 and other programs are rolling out, or vice versa. So two of the programs that are in the fact sheet, you see many of our grantees are exhausting funds. We're going to see less overlap in terms of the populations and HDIS data that are, for example, for families that are receiving child welfare services, or for adults that are engaged with adult protective services. That doesn't mean that homelessness amongst those populations is decreasing. It's probably more of an indication that their access to those important services that were being able to be available with one-time funds is going away. So that's, I think, some of of the nuance that's going to be really hard to disentangle. Like, is this actually a positive thing we're seeing, or is it actually a negative thing and we need to like go and do something about it? But that's, I think, one of the hard things without having a more objective measure of like who's actually experiencing homelessness besides point of time count, which has its own, of course, complications as well. So.
And you know, the intention is the second year of this action plan is to go into that evaluation phase of are our strategic investments moving us in the direction of the North Star, and not to do a program by program analysis necessarily, but what is the design that we're seeing the success in so that we can amplify those successes and in some cases replicate with other departments and other investments. Dr. Kushal?
I just want to amplify what Hannah said completely, right? If you see more people enrolled in HJS, either more people are homeless or we're actually doing a great job reaching more people. I think the other thing I just want to put in mind is like we're in our little beautiful California bubble, but there are a lot of things going on in this country that are totally out of the control of the state that could have major influences on the outcomes that we care about. And how do we think about that, track that, and don't let what could be, you know, we always talk about like the counterfactual, like, you know, the state could succeed, but because of federal funding differences and economic trends and other things, it could have reduced, let's say, the increase that would have otherwise occurred. But then it looks like we didn't do anything, where actually we might have had an enormous impact. And so absolutely +1, as they say, to what Hannah said. And also, how do we think about the larger trends that we are going to be working within?
Councilmember Bass.
Vein, at the end of May, we submitted a report, our evaluation to CMS regarding our 14 community supports. So these are part of CalAIM, the health-related social needs, medically tailored meals, housing deposits, 14 of them. And we submitted the evaluation, and for the first time, we were able to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of 12 of the 14 because of just the way we have to report this information. And so just, I mean, in terms of kind of to your point about how do we prove the case to the feds, how do we demonstrate effectiveness, whether it's health outcomes or other factors, just members who used at least one of the housing trio community support. So this is housing transition navigation services, housing deposits, and housing tenancy and sustaining services, had a reduced inpatient usage of 24.3%. and emergency department usage a reduction in 13.2%. So really proving the case, the theory of the case with these community supports. And so housing deposits were associated with a 31.6 net cost reduction. And so I think we're trying to build the case as we think about CalAIM and the renewal, et cetera, but just sharing given kind of the conversation this afternoon.
So maybe what Secretary Johnson said around like, it's not just what we're reporting, it's these other reporting like, can we get that? Like, can we kind of bring those elements together to tell a more full story of how our folks are actually being served? I don't know if you share that with
Team out. So we did a press release yesterday, so I don't,
congratulations. Congratulations. But like maybe isolation can actually start.
Secretary Moss, we need you to use the microphone for the benefit of the folks online.
You know what I mean. Everybody knows this.
Just to elaborate a little bit on like sort of the connectivity and the discussions that happen well in advance of council meetings. Cody and his team meets with staff of council member departments who have strategic investments. We are very much aware of the limitations and the strains on workforces, but if you are a council member department with strategic investments, meaning you have an AB 977 program, it's imperative that we see you and talk with you and meet with you on a monthly basis in advance of these council meetings. So please continue to commit your staff to that. They're very, very fruitful discussions, and we learn exactly those sorts of things. So I appreciate that. Any other thoughts? I really thought Dr. Kushel would have at least 20 minutes of remarks on this discussion question. Try to use the microphone for the benefit of folks online. if she has any thoughts. If not,
I mean, I think not to feel like a broken record, but just to be really specific about what we're measuring and what we're comparing to. You know that whenever I see that only 2% of people who receive prevention services became homeless, I actually always worry that we're actually not serving the highest risk population. And so sometimes things that can look very good can sometimes be subtle markers of like, gosh, maybe we need to get in there and make sure people take more risks, because actually the data shows you have the most impact on the riskiest people, even though it's very counterintuitive. And so that's where we don't want to box ourselves into something of like, we need to have this great outcome, because sometimes great outcomes are great for an easy story, but are not actually what we want to occur. And this is why, like, I was so glad to hear earlier that like ICH is taking on this really important role of like showing up at local meetings and showing up at state meetings and communicating, because I do think sometimes, and when you think about housing first, we kind of lost the communicate. Like we succeeded 100% in terms of choosing the most effective way to house people, and we lost the communication war. And so I just am, think of someone who loves data to also think about how do we set ourselves up for real success? And so much of this is fantastic. That's just one I always harp on, because that is one that we know that you have the most impact in prevention programs if you serve the hardest to serve people. And by doing that, you're going to have the biggest delta in what you've achieved by serving the hardest to serve people. And therefore, you're going to have many more failures. And so I think that's like a good example. I think keeping our eye on the secular trend, because I do think that if housing choice vouchers and LIHTC support and other things of feds, go down, if the economy really crashes, we're going to see more homelessness. And it's not going to mean that what we didn't do. It might mean it, but it also very well may not mean it, right? And I think, and so I just think that that's a hard thing to do. And I do think having these like internal looking at programs, like, did they work? And then like, what were we hoping for them to accomplish? And what could they have, what would have happened? Like the real question, which is really hard to answer, but it's always like, what would have happened in the absence of this program? And that is in some ways like the hardest thing to answer, and really the question that we really want to hear. And I think sometimes the public's upset about homelessness has been because, like, when I looked at the point in time counts are flawed and all of that, but California had, I think, a 3% increase. Nationally, there was an 18% increase. And it's even worse than it sounds, because California has about 28 to 30% of the homeless population. So if we had had the same increase as the rest of the country, like, you know what I mean? Like, it would have been a 22% increase or something. I haven't done the algebra there, but that was a huge, huge victory. That was because of the amazing work the state has done. But two things: you don't want to sound callous and say a 3% increase is okay, because it is not okay. Like, we wanted a much bigger decrease, but had the state not made the investments that it had, there probably would have been a 22% increase. And the nation would have looked even worse, because like the nation looked a little less bad than it did because we did so well. Those are the things that I want us to think about. But I also want us to be brutally honest about asking, like, what is the right comparison for equity? Because you can have things that maybe look like they're successes, but maybe actually they're not. And so I think in both ways, like, we need to hold ourselves accountable to be brutally honest about what we're trying to do. I think we need to, as Hannah said, not take like more people enrolled in, I mean, HDIS may be a terrible thing and it may be a good thing. And we need to figure out how we figure out if it's a terrible thing or a good thing, right? And one of those questions is sort of like, how long have you been homeless before you started touching these services? And if we shrink that time, that's a really good metric. That means we're reaching people earlier, before you were first touched by a service. That could help with that problem of like, are we actually increasing engagement? And I think we need to be able to message about the counterfactual. The rest of the country, which was facing the same economic pressures we were, went up 18%. They would have gone up 22% if we had gone up the same as they had gone, or whatever it is, whatever the math shows. But we went up 3%. That is disappointing that we went up. And it also is a huge statement about California specific investment that I feel like, not to, I'm a critic of everyone, but like that should have been a moment we should have been proud of, and yet also showed empathy and said, it's not enough. And I think that those are, when I think about evaluation, I think about like, are we performing in a micro level? Like, so each program, are they meeting their goals? Are we working together? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? And can we ask better questions to figure out if like more HGIS is a good thing or a bad thing? And also, how are we affecting the counterfactual? And how do we then message that to the public without, you don't want to be on stage and be like, woohoo, we went up 3%, when obviously we want this problem to be solved. But also, how do we say, look, if we hadn't done what we did, so like the taxpayers who sent their dollars, if you hadn't voted for those things, if we hadn't done those things, this would have been even worse. And so those are just things that I think about when I think about what measures we should use.
That was fantastic for being on the spot, but I appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Kushel. Secretary Sin.
I mean, I think she accomplished like 6 minutes, 7 minutes of the 20 that was expected. You did excellent. Kind of following up on that, we're talking about reporting requirements, performance metrics, but I think it's important for us to ask the question about what we're going to crosstab, kind of going back to the interpretation of data and this issue of what we can currently measure and what we know we can't measure, right? Why don't we look at what we can measure and start really talking about that analysis? So not just collecting, not just reporting out the raw numbers, but cross-tabbing a couple things within the data we have and comparing it and saying, let's at least compare, a line item by a line item, a program by a program, whatever that looks like, because that might help us better understand the populations we're serving. When we think about scale and this idea of a 3% increase, which is still 3% in California compared to the rest of the nation, and those increases far outweighs it. Out of that, for example, I think we house something like 1,400 veterans who are unsheltered in the state of California, according to the AHAR report. Right, which comprises more than the total of 5 states, 5 of the next biggest states, or 3 of the next biggest states in their homeless population. So going back to Dr. Kushel's comment about scale, whereas if we can actually look at what we have in HGIS, what we plan to do with it, but really compare populations, compare some of that data with what we already have in some sort of crosstab to better understand the relationship, I think it's helpful. Because we really can, again, look at, going back to the interpretation of data, we can look at all of the kind of wins and achievements we've made and say, look, we built this much housing, look, we did this. Where are the bulk of those investments? They're probably going to be in our most densely populated Southern California area. What are we doing for our regions up north, in particular tribal country, in particular just geographic areas that continue to be highly underserved and yet still have this great need for unhoused individuals. So how we actually look at what we have is going to be really critical, rather than, I think, starting with, well, how do we add more? How do we add more categories? What are we going to do with what we have right now?
Having served in local government for nearly 20 years of my career, absolutely. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of data now. I do not see a rationale that we can pose to those grantees, to whether they're a provider, a city, a county, a COC, with, we need more information from you, when we have just a tremendous amount of information within this council. And so, sort of a vision of mine that we're hoping to move forward with future opportunities of funding. And I'm speaking that in affirmation, putting it out in the universe that these things will exist, right? But as your departments are putting out opportunities for funding to grantees, that, we reference the action plan, that we refer back to our collective goals that this council has established, and setting the example for local jurisdictions who are ultimately responsible for administering these dollars to their community. So, and this is all information that they have, that we have. So we're starting from a place of abundance. Yeah. Thank you, Secretary Sin. Any additional comments or thoughts before we wrap up this agenda item? Appreciate everybody's participation. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. You're fine.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Erica Pond. I'm actually, it's my first ICH meeting in my new director role. And I am new to all this, but I just want to punctuate a couple things because I've been thinking about communications a lot. Because in public health, I feel like we've lost that game a little bit and we need to restore some trust in public health. And so you can have a lot of data. I think my other prior hat, for many of you who don't know me, it was the state epidemiologist. And as much data as we want to have, we should also collect stories. And I think we really, really want to make sure there's qualitative and stories. And I just also just thinking about a couple other comments here about thinking about context and making sure we're putting it in context, and just with this federal landscape and our budget landscape, that cost effectiveness and like return on investment are going to be really crucial. And the things that might compel us in this room are not going to be the same that might compel others who want to continue to support this. So being able to figure out how we learn from taxpayers and legislators and others who want to continue to fund our work, like really trying to understand what is going to compel them. What do they want to know about what we're doing, and making sure we're clear too about the limitations of our data. But it's sort of that, like, the hearts and the minds. But I admittedly in my career have spent a lot of time on the data and the minds part and less on the hearts. And I think we really have to work on the hearts too. And knowing that some of those perspectives in the hearts are different, and we need to think about that.
Appreciate that tremendously. As I mentioned in my executive officer updates, we recently released a toolkit for disaster preparedness targeted towards emergency management department directors at the local level, and included significant feedback and input from our lived experience advisory board, had participation from a lead member in the in the webinar. We'll have future participation. So the story component is incredibly important, and does not need to get lost in the data, but finding that balance between who are we reaching. We don't need to convince our lead that these things are important. We don't need to convince you all that these things are important. It's the vast majority of other folks that we have to do some convincing on. So communication is incredibly critical. And welcome. We're so excited to have you. Yes. Councilmember DeMorse.
On the story part, all of you may have interaction with the COCs, but that feels like a missing piece for this work. I think the advisory board, the lived experience board really enrich our conversations, but I don't connect with the COCs at all. And I don't know if they sat right there. They're key to this data on the ground. And I'd love to hear from select COCs at some point to see where the disconnect between state and local lies.
Sure. We have, I believe it's 3 seats on our advisory board that the council voted to restructure back in March for continuums of care. So we have that representation on our restructured advisory committee. That's great. But I do also just want to flag, in the interest of transparency, our continuums of care are under tremendous amount of pressure at this point in time, many uncertain what the future will hold for their federal opportunities. So while we're incredibly thankful for their participation and their support in positions on our LEAB, on our advisory committee, we're very aware of the uncertainty that they're facing with federal reductions. So. Secretary Moss?
I just had one last thought, and it came maybe from Dr. Kushel about if the externalities that we can't control actually come to pass. I wonder if we can get ahead of the storytelling of how much work. I mean, it's not like we want to be doomsday, but I think I don't want to be on our heels about our programs have failed. We have not been able to do, California had no money, federal ain't got no money, and everybody broke, and now it's bad. I think it could be helpful for us to start telling the story of when we lose $30 billion in health.
Yeah.
If we disinvest
energy in here.
in X programs, these kinds of, and again, maybe we aren't telling those stories. Maybe we are hearing from, Councilmember Lewis, your staff, your participants. I want us to kind of be proactive in putting the risk factors into the zeitgeist right now, rather than sort of getting to a place where we're talking about how bad it could be. And then we'll wait and be blamed when it's bad. So I don't know. It's not a fully formed thought, but I'm just wondering if there's something that we can collectively think about that would allow us to get out ahead of some of those risk factors and share with the public how much worse things could be. You think it's bad now, and that's not a good marketing message, like I get that, but there's something.
No, I think our colleagues in social services have done quite a bit of this. I mean, I've seen campaigns where it's like X number of Sacramentans will lose, this type of benefit if this reduction continues. So I think there has been some of that work in certain areas that perhaps we can use as a springboard to message collectively for the council. But to your point, it's a very fine line of wanting to celebrate and not cause hysteria. But some of that I think does exist in some of our entitlement programs that we can build from. Councilmember Morse.
Now that I learned how to use this, I'm just gonna keep talking. Today really marks a transition from, it feels prior meetings we were focused a lot in the problem. And today I saw some solutions come to life. And Hannah, your data, to know these 3 programs and to have these numbers in one place, to hear about 453 veterans who, what was the number? Four, yeah. To have it all in one place for all of us, we are the ambassadors of all of this collective work. And I have to look through reports and wade through and figure out what year it was. So we're getting there. This is so exciting today, today to see these results on the screen and to hear just from 3 reports, so that would be something that would help all of us to have just a 2-page fact sheet with some key outcomes. We see press really, to hit the housing, the trio of housing supports, the number served. They're all in different places. So it'd be great to have our hands on that.
Absolutely. And that is part of our communication strategy for the action plan. We are no longer fully staffed in external affairs. So when I say external affairs for Cal ICH, I mean myself and one communication specialist who are very closely monitoring the news and these board reports, etc. But we want to equip you all with the common language and that we're all speaking from the same voice. So yes, we can certainly work on putting together a 1 to 2 pager for each one of our council member departments so that we're all singing the same song. Partridge Family. Yeah, or all of them. Yeah, right. The aggregate is critical for sure. Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts before we move on to public comment? Yes.
Hi, so this is Ricky from Cal OES. And so it's been an interesting conversation because we have 9 projects or programs in the action plan. And but we don't get to like the percentages on these goals. But I think having a fact sheet from each of the agencies would be helpful. Because we don't track like the homelessness information because our programs are primarily focused on victim services, even though there's housing, people are connected to housing. We do have a couple homeless youth programs that do count homeless youth exiting street life. And so there's some, transition age youth programs that overlap, in different departments. But I just wanted to put that out there that we have information on those programs, but which is helpful, but it's also kind of the limitation of the data too, where we're not like informing these numbers here either. So
And the same is true for our tribal investments. You know, we do not see those reflected in these numbers because tribes are not required to use HMIS. It is incredibly cost prohibitive, but the same is true for victim services programs. And so we do have some legislation that Cal ICH is working towards developing goals and setting some standards for data collection in what ways we can. But yes, that's a glaring gap in our ability to report out on certain populations. Thank you. All right, with that, I will thank you all for a very robust conversation. And again, to our panelists, we'll hear more from other departments in our next meeting and pass it to Cal ICH staff person Claire Bannerman to work us through the comment.
All right. We will now accept general public comments. Thank you for your patience, and we appreciate council members listening to public comments as well. We welcome all comments and feedback. We would like to remind everyone that we are unable to discuss items that are not on the agenda for today's meeting. Additionally, due to the structure of this public meeting, we may not be able to respond to any questions. If you have any questions for Cal ICH or the council, the best way is for you to email us at calitch@bcsh.ca.gov. We did receive 2 public comments before the meeting, and it will be provided to council members following this meeting, and it will be available to the public upon request. Everyone will get 2 minutes for their comment, and a Cal ICH staff member will soon share their screen with a 2-minute countdown timer, and we will warn you when your time has expired. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and we will unmute your audio to allow for comment. For those joining us by telephone, you may press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. Then once I call on you to speak, you'll be instructed to press *6 to unmute yourself. All right. Okay, we will start with any in-person public comments. No hands raised, so I will move to the online comments. Okay. Zeke Sandoval, please introduce yourself and you will have 2 minutes for your public comment.
Good afternoon, council members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Zeke Sandoval. I'm the Associate Director of Public Policy for PATH. PATH is one of the state's most impactful nonprofit homeless service providers. It is my coworkers out in the streets right now across the entire state, building relationships with people in encampments, running interim shelters, and bringing people into permanent housing. I'm grateful for the enlightening discussion, and I want to echo the continued comments on the importance of the HAP program. Since January of 2023, HAP has served nearly 250,000 Californians, enabling more than 50,000 people to exit homelessness for good. HAP is not just a program the state allocates to local governments. Local governments, by and large, are usually not the direct service providers. They contract with nonprofits, who are almost never considered in policymakers' discussions of accountability and implementation, which makes this council very valuable. So let's be clear, none of us are satisfied with the status quo, but we are undeniably making progress, and now is not the time to back down, especially in the face of likely cuts at the federal level. Any cuts to HAP will almost certainly mean closed shelter beds, social worker layoffs, and many, many more encampments. So it's critical that the final state budget include at least the consistent $1 billion allocation for HAP. PATH and our many partner organizations make commitments to Californians experiencing homelessness every single day. We need our state leadership to honor its commitment to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeke. Lee Pullen, you are next. You have 2 minutes. Lee, are you present? I've sent a request for you to unmute.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Lee Pullen here. Yes, Lee Pullen, the Director of San Mateo County's Aging and Disability Services Office. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Thank you for what you're doing as a council in the work in addressing homelessness and for the report just now on the progress. I wanted to point out that there has been a program in the state in recent years that has aided in reaching these goals, the goals of helping older adults move into housing to prevent them from experiencing homelessness, or if they have, to ensure that they don't experience homelessness again. Yet that program is going away. And the program I'm speaking about is the Adult Protective Home Safe. It's truly unfortunate given our state goals around reducing homelessness, especially when we know that the rise is coming with older adults, that we're not seeing the program continue in this upcoming budget. I realize there's not much time left, but I ask of this council for any influence you have on getting APS Home Safe reinstated in the budget so we can reach the goals of this council. I would appreciate your efforts, and I'm sure my colleagues across the state would as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, Des Martinez, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, thank you. My name is Des Martinez. I'm 54 years old. I'm an advocate, a survivor of domestic violence, childhood trauma, and homelessness. I spent the last decade of my life fighting for others, running safe camps, warming centers, and volunteering in the very shelters I helped bring to my county. I fought to help get people in. I fought to keep them in, and I fought to get them into housing when no one else would. Today, I'm speaking up not just as an advocate, but somebody who's terrified elder on the edge of becoming homeless again. I'm afraid, deeply afraid, because if I become unhoused, I know I will not make it out this time. My health is failing. My mobility is disappearing. The trauma I endured on the streets, in these shelters, and even as an advocate has taken a toll on me, physically and mentally. I'm trying so hard to get healthy, but nobody tells you that once you become broken for so long, and once you've been living in survival mode for so long, it's 30 times harder to get back. These drug dealers and pimps get in faster than I can because I'm harder to care for. I need ADA access, I need Medicare, I need protection, but there's not enough ADA compliant shelters, motels, or even services for people like me. That's why 48% of the unhoused population in California unhoused are 50 years or older and have behavioral health complex needs and may require a caregiver, which most of us do. And the state treats our deaths like they're natural causes, but it's not natural to die frozen to the ground in the winter or burned to the sidewalk in the summer. That's not natural, that's negligence. We need oversight committees for every shelter and independent living association housings and facilities in the state. They're not just places to live. They're systems where abuse can happen, and they do happen when nobody's watching. We need grievance committees with real power, committees that can enter these shelters and facilities, take complaints from residents, investigate abuse, and ensure accountability. Elders need a place to turn when something is wrong. Right now, we don't have nowhere to turn to. We must stop placing elders and disabled on rapid rehousing programs without a long-term housing plan in place. No elder should be placed in a time-limited unit without a Section 8 voucher in hand within 3 months. Otherwise, we're just a countdown to eviction and trauma all over again. The data should not be about how many they got out of shelter, but how many stayed housed for a year or more. If we put them there, we should still be able to follow up. We need protection from evictions. If an elder's being evicted in the court and they see this, the disabled over a certain age, they should trigger an immediate intervention program. An advocate should be assigned. A care plan should be put in place because no elder should be pushed onto the streets over a broken lease or a landlord that wants to avoid ADA compliance. We need rental protection laws that stop landlords from raising their rent every year or evicting elders for minor reasons just to bring in someone who can pay more. We worked all of our lives. We should be able to rest. We should be able to live some of our lives with dignity. We need to make sure that the payees managing our money are not the same people that are managing our housing. That's a direct conflict of interest, and it allows for financial exploitation on a lot of us. I've seen too many elders out here robbed and raped and dying without nobody noticing. That's the R&R we get out here, robbery and rape. That's not how retirement should look in California. We've earned better, we deserve better. Elders should be prioritized in every housing program, not pushed in the back of the line because we need more care. If I'm losing my housing, there is no safety net for me now. This is why I'm here. I'm trying to build a net before I end up falling through it, because I didn't work this hard and survive this long and fight this many battles to end up dying on the sidewalk.
Thank you, Des. We appreciate you sharing. Okay, Teddy Pierce, you have 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teddy Pierce. I'm an independent HMIS COC consultant. Most recently been working with some of the rural counties. And I just wanted to say that I do think there needs to be a little bit more technical assistance around the measures, the understanding of the measures. Some of those are hard to really understand how they're calculated and then be able to pull that out to the COC so they're understandable. And I'm finding issues specifically around the move-in date for permanent housing and the length of stay, and then street outreach measures and how those are impacting things. So I would just offer that a little bit more TA at the local level would really help people understand kind of, their program design and how they're impacting their measures overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy. Sean Morrissey, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for your time. And a supportive shout out to Des Martinez. My name is Sean Morrissey. I'm with Union Station Homeless Services. And I wanted to speak on HAP. We're urging the continued support and protection of that funding of HAP in the 25-26 state budget. If you ask any service provider how important HAP funding is, it's a game changer, and it would be devastating to our current system to lose it. As one of the leading homeless service providers in LA County, we know firsthand the critical role that HAP plays in reducing homelessness and providing stability for our most vulnerable neighbors. HAP funding has enabled Union Station to operate interim housing and outreach programs across our San Gabriel Valley, including approximately 10 key sites that offer safe shelter, trauma-informed care, and pathways to permanent housing for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. In the past year alone, thanks to HAP funding, we've served over 839 individuals through our interim housing programs. 35% of those, as of this reading, have successfully transitioned into permanent housing, all while supporting a regionally coordinated response to homelessness in alignment with LA County's Homelessness Action Plan. Not only would we lose critical interim housing spots, but untold numbers of staff would be lost if this funding were to end. The importance of HAP in Los Angeles County cannot be overstated. Under the current formula, LA County jurisdictions, the city's continuums of care, and county itself receive $329 million out of the $1 billion HAP allocation statewide. This funding structure directly benefits all the districts and enables a unified regional response to homelessness that is really working in getting individuals and families off the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. All right, Ariane Dalladea, you have 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Ariane Dalladea. I'm here representing Lived Experience Advisors in San Diego. And first of all, I thank you, the council members, for the presentation today. It was very uplifting. However, as it being mentioned earlier in the meeting, and considering the federal austere budget move, I wonder how California will fund these amazing programs. And my second comment is, I understand that special populations have specific needs, and targeting them is a way to, get some fast results. However, as Des Martinez just showed us, please consider two of the fastest growing homeless population today is the elderly and the working homeless. I would love to see that ICH is addressing the needs of this population. And thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Okay, Valentino Daltoso. You have 2 minutes. Please go ahead. Valentino, you are unmuted on my end, but we cannot hear you. I'm going to come back to you, so keep your hand raised. Joy Richardson. You have 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Joy Richardson, and I'm the Vice President of External Affairs and Communications at St. Joseph Center. We're a nonprofit organization based in Southern California that provides comprehensive wraparound services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness. In fiscal year 23-24, thanks to HAP funding, our problem-solving programs were able to assist nearly 2,000 households in avoiding homelessness. Without this critical support, these families would have lost their housing. Looking ahead, without continued HAP funding, we will no longer be able to provide essential rental assistance to families who currently depend on it to remain stably housed. These families are in imminent risk of returning to homelessness if this funding disappears. The impact is clear. The loss of HAP funding would jeopardize the housing stability of more than 2,000 households that St. Joseph has worked tirelessly to keep indoors. I respectfully urge your support of HAP funding remaining in the state budget. The stability and the dignity of thousands of families depends on it. Thank you to the council for listening to my comments today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy. Okay, next up is a phone number ending in 3713. Please press *6 to unmute. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. There's a helicopter going over. It's really loud. I'm sorry. I'm Ruthless. I'm homeless in Los Angeles. I want to uplift Des Martinez. I don't know her, but her comment made me feel like somebody in this meeting was on the same page as me, because there's so many people dying on the streets. There's 7 dying on the streets in Los Angeles every day right now, and that's numbers that we're just now calculating from back in 2023. So when you're talking about all these numbers or metrics and KPIs and stuff, that should be number 1, right? And then when we're talking about there's fewer tents and stuff on the streets, or the increase is not that much, it's well, how many of that is because we died, and people are dying? And my friend Benito Flores is occupying a Caltrans home. He's been doing this since 2020, and he got a legal lease and agreement to be there, but the sheriffs tried to remove him yesterday in the morning. They're trying to deny him his rights under the Roberti Act to purchase the home at an affordable price, like the one it was purchased at when it was seized with eminent domain decades ago and sat vacant for so long. And it's his right to buy this house. He really wants to be a homeowner, but Caltrans and the HACLA are trying to make him homeless. He is 70 years old with diabetes and sores on his feet, and to remove him from his home when you have hundreds of vacant homes, this is the state. This is Caltrans, the state of California's Department of Transportation. Why they own hundreds of homes, I don't know. It's not like our housing department owns any highways, right? So this is ridiculous that they're trying to remove him. So I've been trying to call everyone to see how he can express interest in purchasing the home he's occupying before the sheriffs remove him, because he will die on the street. And yeah, if anyone can help, you can reach me at 818-600-1846. Finally, I want to say, with all the data, I think there needs to be some ethics in data collection. When you're collecting all of this data about us, you're surveilling us and you think you're assisting us because you're using the data to build out services. But when those services get cut off and there's nothing to show for it because the money was spent on software that's measuring something that doesn't exist anymore, you could have just helped people materially. That's it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Des Martinez. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, next we have Jerry Jones. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead. Jerry, you should have received a request on your end to unmute. There we are.
My apologies. Jerry Jones, I'm the Executive Director of the Greater LA Coalition on Homelessness. We are a network of 61 organizations in Los Angeles County, all of whom either provide homeless services or supportive housing. I also wanted to speak very briefly on HAP in two regards. First, to urge the council and those with an ability to talk to the state legislature and the governor's office of the importance of a HAP round 7. The state of California cannot afford to skip a year of this funding. And I think other speakers have highlighted just the incredible real world impact it's having. Also, to urge the state government to spend HAP in a more timely way. The funding rounds that we've had have not been put under contract as quickly as one would assume, namely in the same fiscal year in which they're passed. So HAP 6, as we have been told by LASA and the county, other public administrators here in Los Angeles, is not going to be available until February of 2026 for spending, even though it was appropriated nearly a year ago. That is just very unusual compared to how programmatic dollars are spent in other levels of government for homeless services. And so we need HAP to continue. We don't want to see a return to the sort of episodic, 1 year there's funding, another year there's not for homeless priorities. But we also need the state of California to contract the HAP resources as they're appropriated in the same year at least. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, next we have Shannon Murray. You have 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Calling in to advocate for the reinstatement of the $1 billion in HAP 7 funds into the state budget. These funds are critical to addressing homelessness in California, as you all know. 329 million of this comes into Los Angeles. With these funds, we pay for housing, interim housing, outreach, prevention services, flexible stay services, and rapid rehousing. The loss of these funds will be detrimental to our overarching goal of reducing and eventually ending homelessness. Thousands of people will be affected, either not getting the services they want or losing the services they have. And everyone in rapid rehousing that's paid for by HAP would be put back onto the streets. In the community of Watts, we obviously have a great need, and this would affect at least 1,000 people in Watts and in surrounding communities. I am the director of the Homeless and Housing Services program there, as well as the coalition chair for the South Los Angeles Homeless Coalition. So we really are asking everybody to talk to your legislators to reinstate, and the governor to reinstate these critical dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, and finally, we have Valentino Daltoso. We will try again. All right, Valentino, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead. Valentino, I see that you're unmuted on my end, but there is no audio coming through. If you would like to submit public comment on Valentino, you can email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov, and we can make sure that we get it to our council members. I'm sorry, so I will lower your hand. And with that, I will pass it over to Cody for final remarks and adjournment.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. That was, I think, as Director Damara said, I really appreciated how
engaged you all were in this meeting. We moved from, you know, being in the problem to being in the solutions. And I'm really grateful that you all were so engaged in that work. So thank you for being here. That is the official ending of the meeting at 4:06 p.m. So please join us at our next council meeting on September 3rd at 1 p.m. And have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you all.